Chapter 1135. Gu Beiyue followed Long Fei Ye's directions and arrived at the exit of the tree hole in no time. He brought the unconscious Tang Li out of the tree hole and returned to help. Little Yu was exhausted and fourth Miss Ren was also exhausted. As soon as Gu Beiyue came down, Gu seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly carried little Yu away, leaving fourth Miss Ren to Gu Beiyue. There was still a long way to go from the underground palace to the entrance of the tree hole. Gu really didn't want to carry an unfamiliar woman and fly up. Gu Beiyue and fourth Miss Ren would never have thought of this. Fourth Miss Ren, please excuse me. Shall I carry you up? Gu Beiyue was humble even though he was the academy's director. Fourth Miss Ren's heart was already beating wildly as she carefully laid on his back. Unfortunately, he was already at the entrance of the tree hole before she could even feel his warmth. His body was warm. However, his speed didn't give off any warmth. Once he put her down, everything would be over. Guarding the entrance of the tree hole were a group of poison guards led by Su Donglin, female mercenaries, and a dozen driving arrow archers personally led by Chu Tianyin. The Chu clan army had been wiped out in western Zhou and Chu Tianyin was only left with these driving arrow archers. What's going on? Where are His Highness and the princess? Su Donglin hurriedly asked. What's wrong with Tang Li? Chu Tianyin also came forward. The situation in the underground palace is very complicated. Ning Jing died in the Sea of Fire and Tang Li's situation is not optimistic. Su Donglin, you have to keep a close eye on him. If you can't, tie him up and inform the Tang sect to come over. Remember. Gu Beiyue instructed seriously. Also, send someone to escort fourth Miss Ren and little Yu back. Little Yu's internal injuries need immediate treatment. Su Donglin was stunned. Miss Jing, Gu Beiyue and Gu had no time to waste. Gu Beiyue said seriously, everyone, stay alert. Bai Yanqing is very likely to escape. Don't worry. We will definitely guard it well. Chu Tianyin replied seriously. Su Donglin supported Tang Li with a sad face, but he nodded seriously. Yes, sir. Gu and Gu Beiyue were just about to leave when fourth young Miss Ren reminded them in a hurry, Academy head Beiyue, let's replenish some water and rations, just in case. The princess is pregnant, she can't go hungry. This was a good reminder. The shadow guard hurriedly brought over some food and water. The big bag of food was not heavy, but the 2 pots of water were very heavy. However, Gu glanced at it and was very dissatisfied. Not enough, not enough. Bring 3 more bags of rations and 2 more pots of water. I want big pots. It's best if it's hot. Fourth young Miss Ren hesitated. If it's too heavy, won't it affect you? What are you blabbering on about? Hurry up. Gu said unhappily. Su Donglin immediately ordered people to bring over the items. Gu thought for a moment, then said, do you have bamboo baskets? Bring one over, quick. The shadow guards who were guarding here were also eating dry rations, which were carried over in a few bamboo baskets. Su Donglin personally went to find one. Gu was overjoyed. He crouched on the ground and packed the rations with a serious expression. He stuffed all the rations into the bamboo baskets and put the water pots on top. He tied the baskets securely and carried them on his back. When he saw that Su Donglin had a large horn-shaped water pot on his back, he snatched it over and slung it over his shoulder. This guy had forgotten that he was still wearing underclothes and was covered in wounds. Gu Beiyue couldn't stand it anymore. He asked a shadow guard, who was about the same size as Gu, to take off his outer robe and put it on Gu. Gu seemed to be able to carry the heavy basket of rations effortlessly. In fact, he was very happy. He shouted, brothers, just you wait. When we kidnap Bai Yanqing, everyone will give him a stab each. The two of them returned to the maze. At this time, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were almost out of the maze and had found the cliff exit. Gu and Gu Beiyue followed the secret signal left by Long Fei Yi and successfully met up with them. Your Highness, Princess, we've successfully sent them out, Gu Beiyue reported seriously. Gu passed the water pot to Han Yunxi. It's hot. Thanks. Han Yunxi was indeed thirsty. Long Fei Yi glanced at the bamboo basket of rations on his back and didn't say anything. There's natural light in front. It should be the exit. Everyone, be careful, Han Yunxi said seriously. She and Long Fei Yi had already searched all the nearby passages that could lead to the exit, but they didn't see Bai Yanqing. Perhaps Bai Yanqing was waiting in front. However, when the four of them carefully walked over, they still didn't see Bai Yanqing. Where was he? After saving little Yu, they came down quickly and didn't waste too much time. Could it be that Bai Yanqing discovered something? There's no movement outside. He must still be in the maze. Long Fei Yi said. If it were me, I would also stay in the maze. Gu said casually. Indeed, the maze was filled with mechanisms. Bai Yanqing was familiar with it, but they weren't. Bai Yanqing would only be able to take advantage of it if they stayed here. What's this maze used for? What's with the sea of fire just now? Han Yunxi was curious. There was no maze in the underground palace of Monarch Descent Mountain. These words reminded Long Fei Yi. He said in a low voice, Bai Yanqing is very familiar with the mechanisms here. How did he know? There were rules to follow in the beehive maze, but the mechanisms and secret passages hidden in the maze couldn't be found. As long as the distribution of the mechanisms and secret passages didn't conflict with each other, it could be done as one wished. Bai Yanqing was so familiar with the mechanisms and secret passages here. He even knew about the sound amplification stone. Did he find it himself, or did someone tell him? He needs the blueprint. Gu Beiyue said seriously. Then the blueprint should be with him. We still have to think of a way to find him. Han Yunxi said helplessly. Bai Yanqing was probably very far away from them. She tried for a long time, but couldn't sense the little thing's presence. Gu said, why don't we do this? We'll search from this exit. After we've searched every passage, we'll destroy the passageways and stone rooms. I don't believe that we won't be able to force him out. What a willful way of doing things. Long Fei Yi rolled his eyes. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue couldn't help but roll their eyes as well. These passageways and stone rooms couldn't be destroyed casually. If they triggered a mechanism that they didn't know about, they wouldn't be able to trick Lao Bai, and they would end up trapping themselves instead. When that happened, wouldn't Bai Yanqing laugh at them? Gu Beiyue hesitated for a moment, then said seriously, Your Highness, Princess, this place is dangerous after all. The matter of dual cultivation is still delayed. If we're trapped in a secret passage, everything will be in vain. Why don't we? Gu Beiyue didn't finish his sentence, but Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi understood. Bai Yanqing didn't leave. He must be hiding in the maze waiting for them. Although the hostages had been rescued and they didn't have anything to worry about, Bai Yanqing still had the upper hand in the current situation. Bai Yanqing was very familiar with this maze. If they were trapped in a secret room and couldn't make it in time for dual cultivation, then it would be too late for regrets. Instead of going inside to search, it was better to wait outside. The two of them could first complete their dual cultivation and then waste time with Bai Yanqing. Even if it took a year or so, they weren't afraid. What's more, Princess's delivery date is about the same as the duration of dual cultivation. If we delay any longer, Princess may not be able to subdue Mo Xie's sword spirit. Gu Beiyue said seriously. Dual cultivation only required one night. Long Fei Yi was the main cultivator, and Han Yunxi was only an assistant, so it wasn't strenuous. However, subduing Mo Xie's sword spirit and guiding Mo Xie's sword spirit to a newly forged treasure sword was a difficult task. These words made Han Yunxi realize that she had to think carefully about this problem. Gu, on the other hand, had a relaxed expression. He chuckled and said, "The three of you stand guard outside. I'll deal with him alone." To say that Gu was smart, Gu was really smart. To say that he was stupid, he wasn't stupid, but he lacked a memory. Long Fei Yi and the other two didn't even roll their eyes at him. They simply ignored him. This guy must have forgotten how he was trapped in the secret room where he was cut to pieces. If they hadn't found that place, he would have spent the rest of his immortal life in that dark pit. Let's go out first. Dual cultivation is more important. Long Fei Yi was very decisive. Han Yunxi didn't have any objections. She glanced into the dark tunnel, and then walked out with Long Fei Yi. Gu seemed unwilling. He hugged his arms and leaned against the wall. The bamboo basket on his back was against the wall, making him very uncomfortable. He shifted his position. Who knew that when the bamboo basket slid across the wall, it would make a strange sound? Han Yunxi and the others immediately turned to look. Gu was also shocked. This sound didn't sound like bamboo slid across stone at all. Instead, it sounded like Gu hurriedly shifted a few more times. This time, everyone heard it clearly. There's a mystery. Gu Beiyue strode over and touched the stone wall. At first, he didn't feel anything, but after knocking a few times, he immediately found something strange. This isn't a stone wall. Gu Beiyue said seriously. Long Fei Yi knocked and pressed lightly. He found that this stone wall was the same as the wordless stele on the altar. It was made of imitation stone and wasn't a real stone wall. He took down the entire piece of stone and saw that it was a round Xian gold wall embedded in the stone wall. It doesn't look like a mechanism. Gu muttered. Yes, it doesn't look like a mechanism. It looks like a secret room to hide things. Gu Beiyue said seriously. Long Fei Yi searched for a long time, but couldn't find a mechanism to open the Xian gold wall. He looked at Han Yunxi. Gu Beiyue also looked at her. Princess, I'll have to trouble you to try. Previously, the Xian gold door in the sky pit was opened by Han Yunxi's blood. This small Xian gold door in front of them might have to be opened using the old method. Han Yunxi immediately bit her finger and used her blood to lightly smear on the Xian gold door. The bloodstains disappeared in an instant. It's absorbed. Gu was overjoyed. Han Yunxi waited anxiously. Sure enough, the round Xian gold door gradually started to turn. But the Xian gold door didn't open. Instead, as it turned, some parts of the Xian gold disc started to sink and some parts started to protrude. Han Yunxi and the others crowded around to watch. They didn't understand what was going on. But, as they watched, they were gradually shocked. As the Xian gold disc protruded and sank, an exquisite small model gradually formed in front of their eyes. This was a model of a maze. Chapter 1136. Looking at the maze model that was gradually taking shape, Han Yunxi and the others were shocked. They all woke up and stared at it seriously. Soon, a layer of the maze model appeared in front of them. Long Fei Yi glanced at it and said coldly, "Look carefully. This should be the highest layer, the one where Ning Jing and Su Xiaoyu are. This is the stone room that the sound amplification tunnel leads to." Everyone looked at it seriously after Long Fei Yi said that. Sure enough, they felt that it was familiar. The cliff that Ning Jing fell off is here. Han Yunxi found the cliff. Just as they were talking, the maze model was raised. It was raised quite high, and the second layer of the maze model appeared. Everyone did not say anything. They looked at it quietly and memorized it. The second layer of the maze model was exactly the layer they were on. The distance between the first and second layer of the maze model was quite big. There were countless traps and secret passageways between them. It was too much to take in. Han Yunxi and the others watched without blinking, afraid that they would miss any secret passageway or trap. When the first and second layers of the maze model were completely formed, the second layer was slowly raised, and the second layer of the maze appeared. The distance between the third and second layer of the maze was quite far, and there were all kinds of secret passageways and traps in between, including Gu Qixiao's previous trap of 1,000 cuts. Han Yunxi and the others did not say anything. They all looked at it seriously and memorized it. When the entire maze model was completely presented in front of them, the four of them let out a long sigh almost at the same time. One had to know that throughout the entire process, they had almost forgotten to breathe. Long Fei Ye's judgment was accurate. This maze was a huge multi-layered beehive maze. The entire maze was hexagonal with a total of 6 layers and 6 sides. Other than the 2 exits on the second layer where they were standing, the other 5 layers all had a cliff trap. These cliffs were not cliffs that led to the outside world, but cliffs hidden inside the maze. They were deep and shallow, corresponding to the 5 major traps of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. It could be said that these 5 cliffs were the most dangerous places on each layer of the maze. The cliff that Ning Jing fell from was the fire cliff. Han Yunxi read it once, but she really couldn't remember it. After all, it wasn't something she was familiar with. It was already good that she could understand it at a glance. Gu and Gu Beiyue were the same. They had already silently watched it for the second time, hoping to remember it. After all, this model only showed the maze and the hidden traps, but did not show where the mechanisms to open the hidden passages and traps were. If he couldn't grasp the mechanism, he could only remember the places where the traps would appear and raise his vigilance. However, Long Fei Yi, who had a photographic memory, had already seen through this model and remembered it clearly. His memory was absolutely outstanding. As long as he looked at it once, he could reproduce the entire model in his mind. Like Han Yunxi and the rest, Long Fei was still staring at the model. However, he wasn't memorizing it, but waiting. In such a huge and complicated maze, Bai Yanqing couldn't have personally walked through every path and tried every trap. Therefore, Bai Yanqing must have also seen this model. Bai Yanqing was so familiar with the hidden passages and traps, which meant that he could definitely find the mechanisms to open and close the various hidden passages and traps from this model. Long Fei Yi was pondering, but who knew that the entire maze model would suddenly operate? All the mechanisms were activated, and all the traps and hidden passages were opened and closed again. Oh my God, Han Yunxi couldn't help but exclaim. She was worried that they wouldn't be able to gain the upper hand if they didn't know where the mechanisms were. She didn't expect that the entire model would suddenly operate. All the hidden mechanisms would emerge from their hiding places and immediately hide again. As the mechanisms were repeatedly opened and closed, all the hidden passages and traps were also opened and closed. In fact, every 3-way junction in the maze had a mechanism that could be closed and sealed off the passage. Oh my God! Gu looked at everyone in disbelief. Gu Beiyue also looked up, his face full of shock. Han Yunxi was even more delighted. Bai Yanqing can't gain the upper hand. Let's go find him. Hide this thing well first. If this is exposed, it won't be fun. Gu said with a chuckle. Han Yunxi didn't know how to put away the maze model, but she tried dripping a drop of blood from her fingertip onto its surface. The Xian iron absorbed the drop of blood as soon as it touched the surface. At the same time, the entire model seemed to melt away, gradually collapsing into the Xian gold door and disappearing from sight. Gu picked up the fake stone pieces that had fallen on the ground and set them up. He knocked on it and said with a smile, "All right, we didn't see anything." Since Bai Yanqing didn't have any advantage, how could they let him continue to be so carefree? Naturally, they had to go find him immediately. At first, Han Yunxi was still worried that Bai Yanqing would be involved in the dark and prepare a trap to lure them over. Now, Han Yunxi couldn't wait for Bai Yanqing to do so that they could beat him at his own game. The group immediately walked into the secret room. At this moment, Bai Yanqing still didn't know anything about the model that Han Yunxi and the rest found. He was in a secret room, holding a pot of wine, drinking while talking to Mu Qingwu. He waited at the exit for a while, but the guards didn't send Bai Yuqiao and Ning Jing over. He then went to the top floor of the maze using the secret passage and found that a guard had been poisoned to death. As for what kind of poison it was, he couldn't find out. He didn't know that Ning Jing had fallen into the sea of fire, and mistakenly thought that the poison was Han Yunxi's doing. Han Yunxi and the rest had rescued the hostages. Now that he had no hostages and no one to order around, he remembered Mu Qingwu and decided to return to the labyrinth. So what if Gu didn't die? So what if Han Yunxi wasn't afraid of poison? In this beehive maze, he could still deal with them. Mu Qingwu was locked in the stone room and wasn't tied up. However, at this moment, Bai Yanqing was leaning against the sealed stone door and drinking. He couldn't escape at all. "What do you want?" "Let me tell you, even if I, Mu Qingwu, die, I won't collude with someone like you." Bai Yanqing drank a mouthful of wine and smiled rather calmly. "Ha, hasn't your Li clan always been neutral? Why, even you have your eyes on a Western Qin princess." Mu Qingwu immediately knitted his brows. "What did you say?" He didn't understand what Bai Yanqing meant. The Li clan. Wasn't the Li clan one of the 7 noble families? Weren't they the military strategists who disbanded an army of 100,000? Of the 7 noble families, he was the most interested in the Li clan. It wasn't because he approved of their neutrality, but because he was curious about their military strategies. When Bai Yanqing saw Mu Qingwu's reaction, he suddenly laughed out loud. "Stop pretending. Tianning's Mu clan is a descendant of the Li clan. It's a pity that Long Fei Yi attacked the Tianan imperial capital and slaughtered your entire Mu clan. He hung the heads of your father, your beloved little sister, He, and your entire clan at the city gates. By now, those heads should be rotting to the bone." Mu Qingwu immediately froze. After a while, he said angrily, "Impossible. You're lying to me. Don't even think about lying to me." Bai Yanqing tossed a command medallion to Mu Qingwu. This was General Mu's command medallion with the character Mu carved on the front. Mu Qingwu had seen this medallion before, but he'd never touched it. This was the most authoritative command medallion in the Mu clan's army and was equivalent to a tiger tally. "Touch the back and see if there's a Li character on it," Bai Yanqing kindly reminded him. Mu Qingwu didn't believe it, nor did he want to touch it. But he still couldn't control himself. His little finger secretly rubbed against the markings on the back of the medallion. The Li character. That's right. Could it be that Bai Yanqing wasn't lying? The Mu clan really was a descendant of the Li clan. But why didn't father tell him? Why did father hide it from him for so long? Mu Qingwu still didn't want to believe this was true. He carefully examined the medallion in his hand. He'd seen this medallion several times before. It was the same medallion in his father's hand. This medallion could be forged, but there was no mistaking the brown tassel pendant his mother had personally tied onto it. "It seems that there are many things you don't know," Bai Yanqing said mockingly. He told him about the 100 Poison Sect incident. It was the 100 Poison Sect incident that made him suspicious. Duan Muyao's spies in Western Zhou's palace discovered the truth. Only then did he know that it wasn't Western Zhou's Emperor Kong Qing who led the world to the 100 Poison Sect, but Mu Yuanbue. Mu Yuanbue had sent one of the Chu clan's deputy generals to Emperor Kong Qing through Long Tianmo. Only then did Emperor Kong Qing appear to help him. If not for Duan Muyao's help, he really wouldn't have guessed that Mu Yuanbue was the mastermind behind the incident, not Emperor Kong Qing. To be able to plant a spy in the Chu clan's army and have been a military strategist for generations, Bai Yanqing quickly thought of the Li clan's descendants. Mu Qingwu was dumbfounded. He and Long Tianmo had never understood the 100 Poison Sect incident. They didn't understand why his father would do such a thing. They didn't understand how his father could bribe a deputy general in the Chu clan's army when they didn't have any dealings with each other. After hearing Bai Yanqing's explanation, everything could be explained. He'd always thought that his father didn't like war. He'd always thought that his father only helped Long Tianmo guard Tian'an for his younger sister. He didn't expect that his father was also ambitious. He also didn't expect that the Mu family was the descendants of the Li clan who abandoned the army and fled. Mu Qingwu laughed loudly. His laughter was incomparably bitter and pained. He'd once rejoiced that he wasn't born into an imperial family. If he'd been born into a military family, he wouldn't have had to deal with so many brothers fighting each other, father and son turning against each other, fighting for power and scheming. He'd have been able to be loyal to his country and protect it. When he was very young, his father personally taught him the art of war and told him the history of the military families. Every time he talked about the Li clan who held 100,000 soldiers but didn't participate in the war between Eastern and Western Qin, he and his father would argue until their faces turned red because of their different opinions. He couldn't help but wonder if it was because he looked down on the Li clan and accused them of being deserters, so his father never told him the truth. Thinking of this, Mu Qingwu's heart ached even more. Bai Yanqing didn't mention his deal with Long Fei Yi. He smiled coldly and said, "Your father also hoped that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi would turn against each other." Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi personally led an expedition to the south and fought back to the imperial capital of Tian'an. He hung the heads of your Mu family on the city gate and threatened the entire Tian'an army to surrender. "Young general, enough." Mu Qingwu angrily interrupted. Chapter 1137. Mu Qingwu angrily rushed in front of Bai Yanqing. "Enough. Don't say any more. I won't believe you. Long Fei Yi isn't that kind of person." This was probably the first time Mu Qingwu had called out the name Long Fei Yi so loudly. Before Tian'an's internal strife, he had always respectfully called Long Fei Yi "Your Highness Duke of Qin," in front of and behind his back. After Long Fei Yi's true identity was revealed, he and Long Tianmo both respectfully called Long Fei Yi East Qin Crown Prince. That man, that monarch, that crown prince, had always been the most revered and respected person in his heart. Mu Qingwu would never believe that Long Fei Yi would do something so inhumane. It wouldn't be difficult for East Qin soldiers to conquer Tian'an. In fact, when Long Fei Yi personally led his troops, many of Tian'an's cities surrendered on their own accord. Long Fei Yi had no reason to do something so cruel. Moreover, he wasn't stupid enough to leave a black mark for the people of the world and the historians to condemn. Bai Yanqing allowed Mu Qingwu to close in on him. He calmly stood up and smiled. "Do you know why Long Fei Yi massacred the Mu family?" Mu Qingwu immediately backed away. "I definitely won't believe that. You don't need to say anything more. If you want to kill me, then do as you please." He turned his back and covered his ears. He wasn't stupid. Bai Yanqing had imprisoned him for so long without asking him anything. Now he was suddenly telling him so many things. He wanted him to resent Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi and drive a wedge between them. Earlier, he had heard two female voices. One of them was a child's voice that he recognized. It was the girl who served Han Yunxi, Su Xiaoyu. He did not know what Bai Yanqing had forced the child to do or what he had done to the child, but he was not afraid. He, Mu Qingwu, had always been upright and upright. He had never done anything wrong, and he would never do it. Bai Yanqing walked over step by step. He went around to Mu Qingwu and stuffed 2 bundles of gunpowder into Mu Qingwu's hands. Mu Qingwu was shocked. What was Bai Yanqing trying to do? It must be known that no matter how good one's martial arts were, it would be difficult for them to escape from gunpowder. Bai Yanqing came to him and provoked him to hate Long Fei Yi. What did he want from him? Gunpowder was not easy to obtain. Only the military had it. Moreover, the military did not have a lot of it, and they controlled it very strictly. Ning Qing had the red barbarian cannon, but he did not have a lot of gunpowder. Therefore, he could not conquer the world. Where did Bai Yanqing get these 2 bundles of gunpowder? How many did he have? Countless questions flashed through Mu Qingwu's mind. Was Bai Yanqing using him to deal with Long Fei Yi? Mu Qingwu's eyes flashed with a complicated look. He quickly threw the gunpowder to Bai Yanqing. What are you trying to do? Young general, if you don't believe me, I'll give you a chance to go to Tian Imperial City and take a look. As long as you help me do one thing. Bai Yanqing's eyes flashed with a sinister look. Can you let me go? Mu Qingwu asked anxiously. It seems that you really want to see those heads in person. Bai Yanqing sneered. You. Mu Qingwu looked at Bai Yanqing for a long time. He seemed to be hesitating, but in fact, he already had a plan in mind. Back then, he'd pretended to join the Eastern Palace to help Han Yunxi investigate the matter of the disaster relief grain. But he hadn't been of any help at all. Instead, Han Yunxi had misunderstood him from then on and didn't treat him kindly. Although he had never explained it, he still felt uncomfortable in his heart. Today might be another chance. After pretending to hesitate for a long time, Mu Qingwu finally said, "What do you want me to do?" Bai Yanqing did not throw the gunpowder to Mu Qingwu again. Instead, he smiled mysteriously and said, "Come with me." He turned and walked out of the stone room, leaving Mu Qingwu standing there alone. After he left, the stone door slowly closed. Mu Qingwu knew that Bai Yanqing did not give him much time to think. Once the stone door closed, he would not have another chance. However, Bai Yanqing had no other choice. Besides Mu Qingwu, he only had Duan Muyao. Compared to Mu Qingwu, he trusted Duan Muyao more. Unfortunately, Duan Muyao could not help him complete this task. Thus, he could only take a gamble. Just as the stone door was about to close, Mu Qingwu suddenly rushed out. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Mu Qingwu asked cold. Bai Yanqing smiled but did not say anything. He personally helped Mu Qingwu open his outer robe and tied the gunpowder to him. Then, he turned and left. A trace of unease flitted across Mu Qingwu's eyes. He turned and chased after him. Bai Yanqing brought him to a fork in the road. "In a moment, I'll lure Long Fei Yi and the others here. Wait here and tell them that I ran this way." Mu Qingwu grew alarmed. "Long Fei Yi and the others are here too. If the East Qin Crown Prince is here, then what about the princess? Did she come with him? Are they here to save Su Xiaoyu?" Bai Yanqing smiled. "Old man has brought the people who killed your father and sister to you." Mu Qingwu gave a cold snort. "They won't believe me, especially the Western Qin princess. We've long stopped being friends. Don't worry, they'll definitely believe you as long as you do as I say. As Bai Yanqing spoke, he stroked the gunpowder hidden in Mu Qingwu's stomach and back to make sure it was securely tied. Mu Qingwu looked towards the path Bai Yanqing had pointed out, but couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. He guessed that the path was either filled with traps or gunpowder. Everyone in Cloud Realm Continent knew that Bai Yanqing had an undying body, so Mu Qingwu naturally knew as well. Mu Qingwu couldn't figure out why Bai Yanqing would go through so much trouble to deal with the princess and the rest. Young general, let's make a deal. If you try to trick the old man will burn you to smithereens. Bai Yanqing grinned. As soon as Bai Yanqing tied the gunpowder to Mu Qingwu's stomach and back, Mu Qingwu knew that Bai Yanqing was going to threaten him. Let's make a deal. If you go back on your word, Mu Qingwu, won't let you off even if I become a ghost. Mu Qingwu said coldly. Don't worry, Bai Yanqing's face was full of confidence. He turned on the switch and brought Mu Qingwu to a stone room on the side. Then he fed him a poison pill before pressing it against his ear. Mu Qingwu nodded. He assumed that Bai Yanqing would leave, but Bai Yanqing didn't budge from his spot to sit with him. Mu Qingwu really didn't understand. Wasn't Bai Yanqing supposed to lure the princess and the rest here? Why was he just sitting there without moving? After a while, Mu Qingwu finally spoke up. Weren't you going to lure them here? Don't worry. The princess of Western Qin is the most gifted genius in the history of our poison sect. She'll definitely find her way here and know you've been poisoned, Bai Yanqing was confident. Mu Qingwu was even more bewildered, but he didn't ask any questions. At the same time, Han Yunxi and the others were still searching for Bai Yanqing in the secret room. They'd used a secret passage to reach the highest floor, then searched all the way down. Han Yunxi hadn't reached the 3rd level yet, so her telepathy with Lil Thing was still a bit weak. Lil Thing's senses were better than hers, so she had to be very close to sense its exact location. They searched all over the place, but still couldn't find Bai Yanqing. By the time Han Yunxi's group reached the 2nd floor, they just turned a corner when Han Yunxi told them to stop. There's poison. Someone's been poisoned, Han Yunxi said in a low voice. Who else could be poisoned here? Gu asked suspiciously. The young general of the Mu family, Mu Qingwu, Gu Beiyue said seriously. Duan Muyao, who kidnapped the 3rd venerated lord, should be with Bai Yanqing as well. Bai Yanqing wouldn't even let his own subordinates off. Who knows who he'd poison? Let's go take a look first. Han Yunxi said. Could it be a trap? Long Fei Yi pulled her back. A trap is even better. We'll beat them at their own game. Han Yunxi narrowed her eyes. She couldn't wait for Bai Yanqing to be waiting for them there. Poison lass, which way? Gu hurriedly asked. To the right. There's still some distance left, Han Yunxi said seriously. Gu immediately ran to the front to clear the path. Gu Beiyue said in a low voice, this is a long path. There's a fork in the road about half a li away. There's a stone room at the side of the fork, and there's a secret passage at the top of the stone room that leads to another stone room. We'll probably encounter a trap about 20 steps ahead. Everyone, be careful. Long Fei Yi commented, your memory's not bad. Gu Beiyue smiled. Your Highness, please don't laugh at me. Gu Beiyue walked behind Gu, while Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi followed behind. The 4 of them walked very slowly, moving forward silently. As they got closer, Han Yunxi came to a conclusion based on her judgment of the maze's layout and the detoxification system's feedback. She said in a low voice, the poison person is in the stone room. The poison should be acting up soon. I can detoxify the poison, but we're still a little far away. I can't tell when the poisoning will happen. They were in the tunnel. There was still some distance between them and the stone room, but there was no place to hide. There's no trap from here to the fork in the road ahead. There's only a secret passage at the top of the stone room. The fork in the road ahead is safe in both directions, Long Fei Yi said in a low voice. In other words, other than the secret passage at the top of the stone room, there were no other traps in this part of the maze that could trap them. If Bai Yanqing had an ambush, it would be here. Gu also remembered all the mechanisms in the maze clearly. He said, that secret passage has 2 mechanisms, both inside and outside. I'll be in charge of keeping an eye on it. I'll leave the person in the stone room to you guys. Gu said as he walked forward. At this moment, there was a sudden movement in front of them. Someone fell to the ground. Almost at the same time, Han Yunxi said in a low voice, the poison is acting up. The poisoned person is in danger. Everyone sped up and walked forward. Soon, they saw the stone room's door open in the distance. Mu Qingwu was crawling out of the door bit by bit. His face was pale, and there was black blood at the corner of his mouth. Mu Qingwu. Han Yunxi was still a little surprised. She didn't expect to see this young general again under such circumstances. Bai Yanqing had just left not long ago, so Mu Qingwu didn't know where he went. However, he knew that Bai Yanqing must be secretly watching him. Bai Yanqing had just taught him a set of words to deceive Han Yunxi and the others. If he didn't follow Bai Yanqing's instructions, the gunpowder in his stomach would explode at any time. How would he choose? Chapter 1138. Although Mu Qingwu was an upright person, he wasn't stupid at all. Even if he really lured the princess and his highness to that path, would Bai Yanqing really let them pass and help him detoxify the poison and remove the gunpowder? That was impossible. Bai Yanqing was definitely a cunning man who'd give up on his lackey. Moreover, even if Bai Yanqing would save him, he wouldn't harm Han Yunxi and the rest just to save his own life. Your Highness, Princess. Mu Qingwu was just about to tell Han Yunxi and the rest that there was an ambush on the right path ahead and they couldn't take it. But who knew that the secret passage at the top of the stone room door would suddenly open and a torch would fly towards Mu Qingwu. At this moment, Mu Qingwu finally realized that he had fallen into Bai Yanqing's trap. Bai Yanqing actually didn't fully trust him and Bai Yanqing didn't really want to lead the princess and his highness to the path ahead. Bai Yanqing tied the gunpowder to him just to make use of him to lure the princess and the rest and then detonate it to kill them all. Damn it! The torch was thrown fiercely at him. Mu Qingwu was poisoned and didn't have much strength left. He couldn't dodge it even if he wanted to. Although he was lying on his stomach, there was still gunpowder tied to his back. Mu Qingwu could only shout, I have gunpowder on me, hurry up and leave. Hurry up and leave. Han Yunxi and the rest were shocked. They didn't expect it to be like this. Seeing that the torch was about to hit Mu Qingwu, Gu Beiyue instantly shifted to his side and caught the torch in time. At this moment, Gu had already rushed up the secret passage at the top of their heads. Gu Beiyue and Gu's reaction was so fast that it was out of Bai Yanqing's expectations. If they didn't know that there was a secret passage at the top of their heads, how could they have reacted so quickly? But how could they have known that there was a secret passage at the top of their heads? Bai Yanqing didn't have time to think too much. If he didn't have any hostages, he wouldn't be able to take advantage of Han Yunxi and the rest. He could only escape and lead Han Yunxi and the rest to another trap. After Gu caught up, Gu Beiyue threw the torch to one side and immediately caught up. Long Fei Yi wanted to bring Han Yunxi along. But Han Yunxi still took a pill and threw it at Mu Qingwu. Antidote. She didn't know if Mu Qingwu knew about the Li clan's annihilation, but based on his honest words, she had to give him the antidote. If they hadn't run into the maze by chance, they never would have guessed there was a secret passage at the top of the stone room, much less by Yanqing's ambush. If that fire earlier had burnt Mu Qinggu and exploded, in such a secret passage, even if he tried to escape, he would most likely be crushed to death by the huge rock. That hateful Bai Yanqing, he even used such a method. Long Fei Yi quickly brought Han Yunxi and caught up with Gu Beiyue and the rest. Mu Qinggu looked at the antidote in his hand and went into a daze. After some time, he finally realized that he had to take the antidote. He didn't think that he would be able to escape this calamity. One must know that he was already prepared to die. He laid on the ground for some time before he regained his strength. Once he sat up, he hurriedly removed the explosives from his body. He wanted to chase after the princess and the rest, but after hesitating for a moment, he didn't. Since Bai Yanqing had an immortal body, even if he had the explosives, he wouldn't be able to do anything to him. If he went, he would only add to the trouble. Helpless, Mu Qinggu could only wait in the same spot. At this moment, Han Yunxi and the rest were engaged in an intense chase with Bai Yanqing in the secret passage. This passageway made a turn upwards and went all the way downwards. The further down they went, the narrower it became. Gu Beiyue was still afraid of Bai Yanqing's poison and didn't dare to chase at the front. Han Yunxi was pregnant and was always protected by Long Fei Yi. Hence, they maintained the state of letting Gu chase at the front. Gu's thorny vines almost touched Bai Yanqing several times, but he still thought that he had escaped. The speed of escaping downwards was always faster than the speed of escaping upwards. Although they couldn't catch Bai Yanqing, they couldn't lose track of him either. Han Yunxi and the rest knew clearly that this secret passage led to the stone room on the third level of the maze. There was only one door in the stone room, and after exiting the door, there was another passageway. It would be best if they could catch Bai Yanqing in the stone room. Unfortunately, once Bai Yanqing landed, he immediately injected a needle into the mechanism at the side and activated the mechanism to close the secret passage. Gu kicked open the stone door and saw Bai Yanqing escape from the stone room. Luckily, there was only one direction outside the stone room. "Actually, I'll bring you along," Gu Beiyue said seriously. Gu raised his eyebrows and looked at him, rejecting him in his heart. However, Gu Beiyue grabbed his hand and dragged him away. His speed was like a gust of wind as he chased after Bai Yanqing. With Gu Beiyue's speed, he quickly caught up with Bai Yanqing. However, Bai Yanqing suddenly scattered a cloud of poisonous powder, forcing Gu Beiyue to retreat. Gu faced the poisonous powder and continued his chase. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi arrived quickly. Han Yunxi dealt with the poisonous powder before they continued their chase. "Your Highness, Princess, there's a trap in front. It's the abyss of the third level of the maze. It belongs to the metal element," Gu Beiyue said softly. "Got it." Han Yunxi was alert. When they caught up with Gu, they saw that Gu and Bai Yanqing were facing each other from afar. Gu's thorny vines had already reached in front of Bai Yanqing, but Bai Yanqing grabbed the vine. Between them was the location of the abyssal trap. This abyss was different from the first level's abyss of fire. This was not a bright abyss, but a dark abyss. The activation mechanism was on the wall between Gu and Bai Yanqing. As long as the mechanism was activated, standing at any position in the tunnel would cause one to fall. At the same time, there would be a large rock on the tunnel that would quickly press down, making it impossible to escape and could only fall into the abyss. Other than the second level of the maze, the remaining 5 levels of the maze each had an abyss. Some were bright, some were dark, and they belonged to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The abyss of fire was a raging fire. What would the abyss of metal be? Metal was a weapon. Just like the metal of 10,000 poisons was a dagger. Could it be that there were countless weapons under this abyss? No matter if it was a weapon or not, or what kind of weapon it was, Han Yunxi thought that it would not be a good place. She looked at Bai Yanqing, who was in a deadlock with Gu, and suddenly a plan came to her mind. When Bai Yanqing saw Han Yunxi and the others coming over, he knew that he could not escape. From the corner of his eye, he glanced at the mechanism hidden by the wall and had an idea in his mind. The activation of this trap was the fastest among all the traps in the maze. As long as the mechanism was activated, the large rock would immediately fall, and the trap under their feet would immediately activate. The speed at which the rock fell was so fast that even Gu Beiyue might not be able to escape. He wanted to see how many of the four of them could escape. Bai Yanqing grabbed Gu's thorny vines tightly and was about to pull Gu over when two thorny vines flew out from Gu's other hand. Bai Yanqing pulled out his sword and swung it away. Gu Beiyue had already been pushed to the back. At this time, he could not be of much help. He might even be poisoned and delay everyone's time. He stood guard at the side, constantly vigilant of his surroundings. Long Fei Yi did not dare to put his arm around Han Yunxi's waist and could only put his arm around her shoulders. The two of them were so close that Han Yunxi's poison storage space could help Long Fei Yi block all the poison. However, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi did not go over to help Gu. Instead, they stood behind him and watched. If they guessed correctly, Bai Yanqing wanted to take advantage of the abyss trap in front of them. Han Yunxi's eyes flashed with a trace of craftiness. She shot a hidden needle at Bai Yanqing's hand. Long Fei Yi also attacked Bai Yanqing's hand at the same time. It could not kill Bai Yanqing, but it was enough to make him unable to defend against Gu's thorny vines. Bai Yanqing looked anxious, but he was actually very calm. He deliberately avoided Long Fei Ye's sword and let the thorny vines wrap around his left hand. "Ha, let's see if you can be arrogant again." Gu laughed. He pulled hard and pulled Bai Yanqing a few steps away. Bai Yanqing gritted his teeth and held on. His right hand pulled on the thorny vines and pulled Gu a few steps away. The two of them were very close to the trap hidden in the ground. The two of them were evenly matched and fell into a stalemate. Han Yunxi suddenly shouted, "Long Fei Yi, let's capture him." Although they had not communicated their thoughts, Long Fei Yi could roughly guess what Han Yunxi really wanted to do. Long Fei Yi used his usual domineering tone and said cold, "Gu, if you can't do it, then scram to the side." They did not know if Gu understood what the two of them meant. He smiled cold, "Long Fei Yi, let's make a bet. I can tie this old fart up like a dumpling in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea." With Gu's words, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi were relieved. At crucial moments, this guy was still reliable and understood what they meant. Gu Beiyue, who was watching from the side, had already seen through everything. He glanced at the mechanism on the wall under the moonlight and the corners of his mouth curled into a beautiful arc, shameless boasting. Bai Yanqing said angrily, "Take this." Gu took out two more thorny vines and attacked Bai Yanqing's legs. Actually, Bai Yanqing could have dodged a kick, but both his legs were tied up. Once the thorny vines bound Bai Yanqing's legs, Gu immediately retreated and pulled Bai Yanqing over. Bai Yanqing staggered a few steps and stood on top of the trap. A cold smile flashed past his cold eyes. Of course, he knew that he was standing on top of a trap. However, he did not struggle and allowed the thorny vines to wrap around his body and bind him tightly. He waited, waiting for Han Yunxi and the rest to walk over. He hid a golden needle in his mouth. As long as they walked over, he would immediately spit out the golden needle to activate the mechanism. He was willing to accompany Long Fei Yi and the rest to fall into the abyss. There was a sea of arrows at the bottom of the abyss. Countless arrows were stuck in the ground with the arrowheads pointing upwards. As long as a mortal's body was pressed down by a large rock, it would be pierced by tens of thousands of arrows. Gu did not pull Bai Yanqing over and turn to look at Long Fei Yi, not even the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. I won. Humph, humph, so what if you tied up the old man? You can't kill the old man. Bai Yanqing deliberately provoked them. Relax, this prince does not want to kill you. This prince will personally properly serve you. Long Fei Yi said this and walked forward with Han Yunxi. Step by step, they were just a few steps away from stepping into the trap. Bai Yanqing was waiting for this moment. He gave a cold laugh in his heart as he looked at Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. The needle in his mouth was already prepared. But who would have thought that at this time, Gu Beiyue would suddenly throw out a small throwing knife that landed on the mechanism. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi suddenly stopped. In that instant, a large crack appeared under Bai Yanqing's feet. At the same time, the large rock above them fell down, pressing down on Bai Yanqing as fast as lightning. Long Fei Yi immediately chased after him with Han Yunxi. Gu Beiyue and Gu also chased after him. The large rock's falling speed was truly shocking. When they chased after him, before they could see what the abyss was like, they heard a large pang sound. Chapter 1139. Pang. With a loud sound, Bai Yanqing's huge rock fell to the ground in an instant. Bai Yanqing was pinned under it. Han Yunxi, Long Fei Yi, Gu Beiyue, and Gu were standing on top of the big rock. They didn't need to exert any pressure. With Bai Yanqing's internal strength, it was basically impossible for him to shake off this rock. Although they had seen the model of this abyss in the maze model, but seeing it with their own eyes, Han Yunxi and the others were still amazed. This abyss belonged to the metal element. Looking around, the entire abyss was an incomparably huge stone room. The ground was filled with sharp arrows. These sharp arrows were bigger than the spears used on the battlefield. Moreover, the arrowheads were sharp and were all dipped in poison. Looking around, this was simply a sea of sharp arrows. TSK, if we fell, we would definitely die. Gu said with emotion. With this speed, I can't escape. Gu Beiyue wasn't being modest. He was telling the truth. This abyss was very deep. The speed at which the big rock fell was simply in an instant. The bottom of the abyss and the top of the big rock were very far away. Bai Yanqing couldn't hear what they were saying. At this moment, not only was he pinned under the big rock, but there were also several arrows piercing through his body. If he said that it didn't hurt, it would definitely be a lie. If he didn't have an immortal body, just this big rock alone would be enough to crush him into pieces. Not to mention those sharp arrows that pierced through his body and limbs. Adding up the arrows that pierced through his body and limbs, there were at least 20 arrows. He was in pain. It was the first time in his life that he suffered so much. There wasn't a single part of his body that didn't hurt. It was so painful that he broke out in cold sweat. It was so painful that for the first time in his life, he thought of dying. However, this thought only flashed through his mind. Since Mu Axian left him, there was only one obsession in his heart. Before this obsession was settled, how could he want to die? He wanted to live well. He wanted to see whether he was right or Mu Axian. Obsession arose, and so did hatred. Hatred calmed Bai Yanqing down quite a bit. He also realized that he had been tricked by Han Yunxi and the other three. They must have known that there was a trap here, so not only did he fail to scheme against them, he fell into the trap himself. Thinking of this, Bai Yanqing's hatred grew even stronger. Those young people, especially the descendant of the East Qin imperial family, Long Fei Yi, how could they beat him? He would wait. Wait for them to move the boulder away. He knew that they wouldn't accept this, and their unwillingness was his opportunity. Bai Yanqing was not overestimating himself, but he had underestimated Long Fei Yi. At this moment, Long Fei Yi had already asked Gu Beiyue to check the surroundings. After walking one round, he found that this abyss was indeed like the model of a maze. It was hidden deep in the maze, and it was an incomparably huge sealed stone room. The only exit was the one above them. Long Fei Yi said, "Gu, seal the exit." Gu raised his head to look at the huge exit. After pondering for a moment, he quickly raised his hand. Several thorny vines immediately flew out of his sleeve, and soon grew into a huge net of thorns at the exit. Han Yunxi looked up and was shocked. So many thorny vines. Gu rubbed his head. "I'm a bit dizzy after raising so many. I'll leave Bai Yanqing to you guys. I'll be in charge of guarding the exit." As he spoke, he flew up and sat on one of the thorny vines to swing. He was as relaxed as he could be. Han Yunxi and the other two really couldn't tell why he was so dizzy. "Your Highness, Princess, I'll guard the exit with 7th young master. I'll leave the rest to you guys," Gu Beiyue said seriously. In such a confined space, they didn't have to worry about Bai Yanqing escaping. With the princess around, no matter how good Bai Yanqing's poison skills were, they would be useless. Although Bai Yanqing had an immortal body, it would be difficult for Bai Yanqing to catch up to them with her highness's martial arts skills. Gu was also standing guard at the side. If there was any danger, Gu could block it at any time. At this time, they had the absolute advantage. Gu Beiyue couldn't be more relieved. He had retreated to the side because he knew that the princess and her highness wouldn't be merciful this time. They would be very cruel. He didn't like cruelty, but he wouldn't object to her highness and the princess being cruel. When Gu Beiyue and Gu flew up, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi flew down and stood in the gap between the sharp arrows. This big rock completely covered Bai Yanqing, not even his head was exposed. Long Fei Yi pulled out his profound frost sword and pried the big rock to the side. They finally saw Bai Yanqing's head. Bai Yanqing's head was deeply buried in the ground. He slowly raised his head. "Hee, didn't you want to trap old man? If you have the ability, don't let old man out." Bai Yanqing sneered. Who knew that Long Fei Yi would suddenly pull out his sword? The big rock instantly pressed down heavily. In that moment, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi clearly heard Bai Yanqing cry out in pain. Long Fei Yi's eyes flashed with a sneer. He brought Han Yunxi to the big rock. He took a step forward and heavily stepped on the rock. Very quickly, the full-level lustbite power gathered at his feet, forcing the big rock to sink down, pressing down on the ground. Not long later, the big rock had sunk down by 3 inches. In the process of sinking, who knew how much pressure Bai Yanqing was under? His back, internal organs and bones were all pressed down, including his face. The pain was so much that he couldn't bear it anymore and exploded out with his inner strength to block it. But after blocking it, he realized that his inner strength was not even half of Long Fei Yi's. He couldn't block it. Pain. The pain was unbearable. Still, Long Fei kept going. He had no intention of stopping. Just how long was this torture going to last? Meanwhile, Lil Thing, who was trapped in Bai Yanqing's poison storage space, could sense that Mama Yunxi was nearby, as well as Bai Yanqing's pain. It was so happy that it ran all over the space, jumping up and down. It was no longer a little squirrel, but a tall and mighty snow wolf. When it jumped around like this, it looked like an idiot. Bai Yanqing had trapped it for so long that it had long swept clean the poison storage space. Although those things were disgusting, it endured the disgust and ate them, recovering quickly. Now it was not only fully recovered, but even stronger than before. It bared its fangs and claws in excitement before suddenly turning back into a little squirrel. It flew high into the air, then landed back on the ground as a snow wolf. Very soon, it seemed to be addicted to playing, turning into a snow wolf one moment and a squirrel the next. In the end, it tired itself out from playing. Enchanting, on the other hand, was still suffering in pain. It sat on the ground with its paws tucked in front of its chest like a little squirrel, wondering what Mama Yunxi and the rest were doing outside. How did they torture Enchanting? Why did it take so long? It couldn't figure it out, so it picked up its secret stash of poisons and was about to eat them when it saw its own white paws. It gave a start before realizing that its snow wolf form wasn't suited for such adorable movements. It immediately stood up and raised its noble head. Whoa! It gave a howl to salvage some of its wolf image. Lil Thing had already messed up its own form. Enchanting was still suffering from unbearable pain. He had already sunk an entire foot into the ground. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. But even if he wanted to shout, his face was buried in the ground. Besides enduring the crushing pain of his flesh, bones, and organs, there was nothing else he could do. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi naturally wouldn't let Enchanting suffer alone. They wouldn't be able to quell their anger until they paid back everything Enchanting had done to them. They wouldn't be able to calm down until they avenged Ning Jing. It was good that Enchanting didn't die. They wanted him to live a life worse than death. On top of the boulder, Long Fei Yi was looking at Han Yunxi and waiting. Meanwhile, Han Yunxi was sitting leisurely on the boulder, leisurely eating her rations and drinking warm water. Han Yunxi was used to chewing slowly, so now that she was eating rations, she chewed even slower. But Long Fei Yi didn't think she was slow at all. Instead, he asked her to eat slowly and not choke. Gu Beiyue and Gu, who were sitting high up on the thorny vines, were also waiting and watching. If Enchanting knew that Long Fei Yi, Gu Beiyue, and Gu were leisurely watching Han Yunxi eat, how would he feel? After a while, Han Yunxi finally filled her stomach. Long Fei Yi found that this woman's appetite seemed to be bigger than before. Not to mention that she had to feed 2 people, even when Han Yunxi wasn't pregnant. Long Fei Yi often asked her to eat more. Eat more? Long Fei Yi asked seriously. No, it's uncomfortable to eat too much. I have to eat more. Han Yunxi touched her stomach and said seriously. Don't you want to rest for a while? Long Fei Yi asked again. It's okay, I'll work when I'm full. Han Yunxi said with a smile. She smiled so contentedly that Gu and Gu Beiyue also unconsciously smiled. The two inadvertently looked at each other and their smiles suddenly froze. They were a little embarrassed. Gu took out a small bag of dry food. Here. I'm not hungry, leave it for the princess. Gu Beiyue declined. I'm not hungry either. Gu said to himself. Were these 4 guys here to deal with Enchanting or to take a vacation? Of course they were here to deal with Enchanting. Han Yunxi stood up and moved her hands and feet a little. She gently patted her stomach. Little guy, let's go deal with the bad guys with Daddy and Mommy. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi finally landed on the large rock. Long Fei Yi used the profound frost sword to pry up the large rock like before. Enchanting was in so much pain that he almost couldn't raise his head. At this time, he realized that his undying body was not bottomless, it could still be destroyed. Enchanting, if you beg this prince will let you out. Long Fei Yi said. Enchanting slowly raised his head to look at them, his eyes filled with hatred. Would he beg? Chapter 1140. Would Enchanting beg Long Fei Yi? He was still thinking of escaping, so he figured he could only make a move against Gu Beiyue under these circumstances. Using Gu Beiyue to divert their attention, then escape the maze. Han Yunxi and the others must have discovered the maze model. In that case, he would not have any advantage in the maze. He could only escape. Han Yunxi could protect Long Fei Yi from being poisoned, but she definitely could not protect the world from being poisoned. Once he escaped, he would make them regret it. A cold light flashed past Bai Yanqing's eyes, and he said without hesitation, "Long Fei Yi, old man, I beg you, let go of old man." "Bai Yanqing, you should act like you're begging," Long Fei Yi said. Actually, he had been hoping that Bai Yanqing would come out from under the rock. If Bai Yanqing did not come out, how could he and Han Yunxi torture him? If he did not beat this old thing full of holes today, he would not be able to face Tang Li's tears. Long Fei Ye's anger had been suppressed in the bottom of his heart, and he could no longer suppress it. If he did not take it out on Bai Yanqing, who would he take it out on? "Your Highness, old man, I beg you to let me go." Bai Yanqing finally had a pleading tone. Unfortunately, Long Fei Yi was not satisfied. "Say it again." He used a commanding tone. Bai Yanqing was furious, but he still held it in and repeated it again. However, Long Fei Yi was still not satisfied. He said expressionlessly, "Say it 10 times. You." Bai Yanqing was furious. Long Fei Yi pulled Han Yunxi and turned to leave. Bai Yanqing had no other choice. In order to get out, he could only compromise. In one breath, he begged Long Fei Yi 10 times. However, Long Fei Yi refused to let him go. He said, "It's a pity that this crown prince can't decide whether to let you go or not." Long Fei Yi. Bai Yanqing finally couldn't hold it in any longer. He roared furiously, "Long Fei Yi, don't push your luck. Then you can stay here. Go, find some firewood for this prince. This prince will burn it for 3 days and 3 nights. Long Fei Yi said. Bai Yanqing's face immediately turned pale. The pain of being burned was extremely unbearable. "Okay, wait for me, I'll be right there." Gu shouted, but he still sat high up and didn't move. Who knew that Long Fei Yi would look up and ask cold, "Still not going?" Gu was shocked. He looked at Gu Beiyue and asked in a low voice, "Is that guy serious?" "I'll go. You guard it well, just in case." Gu Beiyue smiled and immediately left through the thorny vines. "How do I burn it?" Gu pondered. Bai Yanqing finally understood what it felt like to be afraid. He said, "Princess of Western Qin, old man begs you, I beg you to let the old man out. Then if you want to take revenge, the old man is yours, as long as you let the old man out of here." Long Fei Yi said that he couldn't make the decision. It was clear that he wanted him to beg Han Yunxi. "How about this, you beg me 10 times. I'll let you out, and we'll fight again. If you're still tied up by us, you'll tell me what's your relationship with my mother," Han Yunxi said seriously. Han Yunxi's words were much more believable than Long Fei Ye's. Bai Yanqing saw hope, but he still pretended to be angry. After a while, he agreed to Han Yunxi's request. He begged Han Yunxi 10 times, but Han Yunxi laughed loudly. "Bai Yanqing, didn't it feel good to play with us back then? I think it's quite fun to play with you now." Finally, Bai Yanqing's face darkened completely, and he stopped talking. He only stared coldly at Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi. Not long after, Gu Beiyue brought over a pile of firewood. Long Fei Yi personally threw the firewood into the cracks in the rocks, filling Bai Yanqing's eyes. "Undying. Hee hee." Long Fei Yi sneered and casually threw in a torch. He said, "Bai Yanqing, this crown prince said, you should act like you're asking for help. Just stay here properly." The fire quickly spread to the firewood and gradually burned. Bai Yanqing buried his head in the ground. Although he wasn't burned, he soon felt the scalding heat rush over him. After a while, the surrounding rocks started to heat up. The temperature of the rocks was much higher than the temperature of the flames. The rocks were stuck to Bai Yanqing's body. He was undying, but his flesh would be injured. Although the injuries would heal quickly, they would continue to be injured. If he was injured, it would hurt. How long could he last? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi stood far away and watched as the flames gradually engulfed Bai Yanqing. However, the two of them were indifferent. They didn't feel that Bai Yanqing was pitiful, nor did they feel that they were cruel. Even if it was 10 times or 100 times crueler, it wouldn't be enough to redeem the heinous crimes that Bai Yanqing had committed all these years. The falling out between the eastern and western Qin camps, the massacre at the peak of Tian Shan Mountain, Bai Yuqiao's death, Ning Jing's death, Xiao Yu's suffering, and so on. All of these were things that Bai Yanqing couldn't make up for by cutting him into 1,000 pieces and burning him in flames. As the flames burned, the rocks became hotter and hotter. Bai Yanqing's back was stuck to the rocks and it was scalded until it festered. The poison goo human's physique allowed these injuries to heal quickly. However, because it was stuck to the rocks, the skin immediately festered again. The pain that Bai Yanqing endured was far greater than being burned by the flames. He gritted his teeth and endured it. What supported him was none other than his hatred for Mu Axayan and Han Yunxi. His hatred for Long Fei Yi, the descendant of the East Qin imperial family. How long could hatred last? Hatred actually couldn't support anything. It could only give birth to hatred and make people go crazy. Madness couldn't support anything, but madness would make people stop at nothing. It seemed like a kind of support, but it was actually a kind of destruction. The fire burned for an entire day and night. Long Fei Yi began to admire Bai Yanqing's willpower. But who knew that Bai Yanqing would compromise the next morning? He begged them in an extremely pitiful tone. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, old man, I beg you. I beg you to let go of the old man. Long Fei Yi knew that this begging was still not sincere, but he still looked down on Bai Yanqing. If Bai Yanqing persisted, perhaps they would take the initiative to let him go. He didn't need to beg like this. Long Fei Yi glanced at Gu and Gu Beiyue. The two waved their hands, indicating that they should be on guard. Han Yunxi hugged Long Fei Yi and whispered, "Don't worry about the poison. I'll guard." "I know." Long Fei Yi had absolute confidence in her. He gently hugged Han Yunxi with one hand and held his sword with the other. The sword that was originally prying up the big rock suddenly rose. The sword light shone brightly and cut the big rock into 2 halves. At this moment, Bai Yanqing suddenly rushed up to the sky and broke free from the thorny vines. He was about to rush to the exit when he saw Gu and Gu Beiyue guarding the exit. He immediately raised his hands and made a knot, riding the wind. Gu Beiyue immediately dodged. The wind blew past, only hitting Gu. Gu sneered and waited for Bai Yanqing to come over. He used the thorny vines to bind Bai Yanqing to death. This time, without the big rock holding him down, he would definitely not let go. Bai Yanqing immediately turned around and continued to attack Gu Beiyue. He didn't notice that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were already behind him. Just as he was about to control the wind with his hands again, Long Fei Yi suddenly slashed a sword aura at Bai Yanqing's back. Not only did it cut open his flesh, but it also sent him flying. Bai Yanqing flew out uncontrollably and smashed heavily on the ground. Once again, he was pierced by thousands of arrows. Pain! It went without saying. He immediately flew up. The pierced wounds on his body were also bleeding. Gu Beiyue had already returned to Gu's side. The battlefield was left to Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. Bai Yanqing stood in the air. Only then did he realize that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi had let him out not to tie him up and leave the maze, but to torture him. He had to admit that he realized this when he didn't have the chance to deal with Gu Beiyue. He was very vexed and regretful. All his begging had been in vain. The more Bai Yanqing thought about it, the angrier he got. He said coldly, "All right. This old man wants to see what you can do to this old man." He stood in the air, motionless. Long Fei Ye's sword didn't stop. The sword slashed again and again, slamming Bai Yanqing to the ground. Sharp arrows pierced through his body. Bai Yanqing didn't move. He just lay there with a sneer on his face. Long Fei Yi raised his sword from bottom to top. Bai Yanqing was lifted into the air by the sword aura. Long Fei Ye's sword slashed down again. Bai Yanqing fell to the ground again. Long Fei Ye's sword moved faster and faster. In a short while, Bai Yanqing's body was riddled with holes. His healing speed couldn't keep up with the speed of his injuries. He didn't look like an immortal person. Instead, he looked like a soulless body that could be tortured by Long Fei Yi. Pain. He admitted defeat. He suddenly laughed. Long Fei Yi, you can't kill me. One day, I'll watch you grow old and die. Han Yunshi, do you think the child in your womb will be a match for me? After saying that, Bai Yanqing immediately laughed maniacally. Maybe Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi's son could learn their ultimate martial arts, but he might not necessarily have the poison storage space. He would win for sure. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi were indifferent. They knew that no matter how powerful their child would be in the future, he wouldn't have anything to do with Bai Yanqing. Because they would definitely get rid of Bai Yanqing. They definitely would. Long Fei Ye's sword didn't stop. He slammed Bai Yanqing down again, facing the sharp arrows head-on. Old man, let me tell you. Everything that the old man suffered today, I will return to your child 100-fold. Definitely. Bai Yanqing roared. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi still didn't make a sound. Long Fei Ye's sword continued. Sword after sword, again and again. Bai Yanqing was tortured until he was in a sorry state. He didn't look human anymore. Finally, Bai Yanqing couldn't keep up the act anymore. He roared, Long Fei Yi, what's the point of this? You just... Long Fei Yi directly slashed his sword at his face. He didn't even want to listen to him. Gu watched with interest. The old thing can't take it anymore. Gu Beiyue watched. Isn't he being pressed under a big rock now? Ask him if he's willing to kneel down and beg for mercy. Gu immediately shouted, Bai Yanqing, if you kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times, I will plead for mercy for you. Before Bai Yanqing could answer, Long Fei Yi replied coldly, Gu, don't even think about it. Long Fei had plenty of energy. He'd like to see how Bai Yanqing would admit his wrongs and beg for mercy in the end. Who knew that just as Bai Yanqing crashed into a corner and the ground was covered in blood, the ground suddenly caved in. Bai Yanqing instantly fell down. There weren't any hidden traps in the maze model. What was going on? Chapter 1141. Long Fei Yi and the others clearly remembered that this abyss was completely sealed off aside from the exit at the very top. There were no secret passages or traps. After him. Long Fei Yi didn't want to let Bai Yanqing escape again. Han Yunshi and the others had the same idea. Gu was the first to give chase, followed closely by Gu Beiyue, Han Yunshi, and Long Fei Yi. However, they didn't go far before they fell into darkness and lost all control. No matter how hard they tried to fly up, they couldn't. It was as if a mysterious force was pulling them down. What kind of place was down there? Long Fei Yi held Han Yunshi tightly while Gu's vines wrapped around Gu Beiyue and the two of them to ensure that they wouldn't be separated. It really didn't feel like they'd fallen, but more like they'd entered some kind of formation. However, Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyuan knew that this wasn't a formation. No one could explain what kind of place they'd fallen into. What was Bai Yanqing's situation? Was Bai Yanqing familiar with this place? Seeing that there weren't any threats around them, Han Yunxi relaxed a little. She murmured, Bai Yanqing probably doesn't know about this exit, or he would have escaped long ago. Princess, this subordinate has been watching him the entire time, but I didn't see him trigger any traps. This is very likely a coincidence, Gu Beiyue hastily said. No matter where this place is, it's still the poison sect's territory. Poison lass, you're still a descendant of the poison sect, but you're not even familiar with your own territory. Gu wasn't complaining, but teasing Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi was about to speak when she suddenly blurted out, Lil Thing, what is it? Long Fei Yi was a little nervous, thinking that the little thing could help Han Yunxi advance. Unexpectedly, Han Yunxi said, the little thing is in pain. It's crying. Han Yunxi had also sensed Lil Thing's presence earlier and knew that Lil Thing was very happy. She even imagined that with Lil Thing's temperament, it would definitely be jumping up and down in Bai Yanqing's poison storage space. However, at this moment, she could feel the little thing's intense sadness. What's wrong with the little thing? Even if they let Bai Yanqing escape, Lil Thing shouldn't be so sad. What's wrong with that little toy? Gu asked curiously. Yes, the little thing was too small. In Gu's eyes, it was like a small toy. What's wrong with the little guy? Could it be related to this place? Does it recognize this place? Gu Beiyue asked with concern. It's possible, Han Yunxi agreed with Gu Beiyue's guess. Perhaps it was because she was connected to Lil Thing's thoughts and was infected by its feelings, but Han Yunxi suddenly felt a little sad as well. She silently prayed in her heart that they wouldn't fall into a bad place. But right now, Lil Thing was crying. It had already transformed into a little squirrel and curled itself up into a little ball, sobbing quietly in the darkness of the poison storage space. Grief filled the entire poison storage space. In the darkness, Lil Thing seemed tiny, lonely, and helpless. It had lived for too long, so long that it had forgotten its past, its parents, how it had grown up, and how it had come to be. It had even forgotten how it had ended up in the poison sect's forbidden grounds. Lil Thing didn't remember either. It only knew that since it followed Mama Yunxi, it had to protect her for the rest of its life. It only knew that since it liked the gentleman, it had to like him for the rest of its life. Lil Thing's life was eternal. Even if Mama Yunxi and the gentleman left one day, Lil Thing would still like them. Even if Lil Thing lived for so long that it forgot everything, it would still remember them. But when Bai Yanqing fell all the way down, the familiar scent of Lil Thing's aura grew stronger and stronger. It didn't need to think about it anymore. Lil Thing didn't need to try to remember, because those memories that it had deliberately forgotten began to surface in its mind. In those memories. Back then, it was very, very small. When it was a snow wolf, it was about the size of this squirrel. Back then, it was still a cub. It was a sacred beast worshipped by the blood wolves, an undying poison snow wolf. They lived carefree in the forests of the poison sect. But that day, someone used a mysterious force to slaughter all the snow wolves. Lil Thing hid in the sky pit and escaped by luck. It never knew why it liked the sky pit so much, or why it waited there for its master to come. As it turned out, the poison sect sky pit was its refuge. In the fragments of its memories, it saw swords rising and falling, splattering blood everywhere. Snow wolves fell one by one to the ground in a heap of corpses. Lil Thing was scared out of its wits. It didn't even dare to make a sound as it turned tail and ran, diving into the sky pit to hide. That massacre happened a long, long time ago. Back then, the poison sect didn't even exist. Before the poison sect appeared, the sky pit and the mountains of the poison sect's forbidden grounds was the territory of the snow wolves. A group of people who worshipped the snow wolves lived there. They called themselves the Snow Wolf Clan. They have the ability of the poison storage space, and through the cultivation of the poison storage space, they can obtain extremely high poison skills. After the snow wolves were slaughtered, they changed their names and hid in the mountains of the poison sect's forbidden grounds, rarely appearing in public. They erected wordless steels in the western forests as a memorial to the snow wolves. Then they built a sacrificial altar to worship them every year. Lil Thing was already sobbing uncontrollably at the memory, its tiny body trembling non-stop. It remembered. It remembered everything. It was Lil Thing who told the Blood Wolf clan about the poison goo humans. It was Lil Thing who led the Snow Wolf clan to dig up 10 stalks of poison grass in the sky pit. The Blood Wolf clan had eaten those poisonous grasses to obtain an undying body. Those poisonous grasses needed 300 years to bloom and bear fruit, and another 300 years to ripen. The Snow Wolf clan had planted those 10 stalks of poison grass in the glazed walls of the sacrificial altar. Bai Yanqing had used those 10 stalks of poison grass to cultivate his undying body. Later on, the Snow Wolf clan's population dwindled, and the poison sect's forbidden grounds was taken over by Medical City. Once Medical City was established, it split off from the poison sect and took over the entire back mountain. The daughter of the Snow Wolf clan secretly married the head of the poison sect, forming the poison sect. Together, they ruled over the poison sect's forbidden grounds. With the Snow Wolf clan's help, the poison sect began to plant poison grass in the poison sect's forbidden grounds. Gradually, the poison sect began to develop. Lil Thing also grew up and became mentally connected with the Snow Wolf clan. It could enter the Snow Wolf clan's poison storage space to cultivate. Lil Thing used to be a god worshipped by the Snow Wolf clan, but it was reduced to the poison sect's poison beast and became infamous. Later on, its master died of old age while Lil Thing lived on forever. Lil Thing watched as several of its masters left and went into hiding in grief. But one day, Lil Thing returned to the poison sect to find that it had been destroyed. The people of Medical City captured Lil Thing everywhere, so Lil Thing decided to stay obediently in the sky pit. One day, Lil Thing ran all over the mountain and discovered that there were still orphans of the poison sect. Lil Thing remembered that one of the 2 people was Bai Yanqing. Even now, Lil Thing didn't know who the other one was. However, Lil Thing was certain that the other person had the purest blood of the Blood Wolf clan. Bai Yanqing was only a direct descendant of the poison sect, a descendant of the Blood Wolf clan and the poison sect. After the Snow Wolf clan and the poison sect's direct descendants intermarried, the Snow Wolf clan no longer existed. The 2 clans shared the name of the poison sect. Later generations of the poison sect's direct descendants were all descendants of the Snow Wolf clan and the poison sect's direct descendants. Thus, the poison sect's direct descendants also inherited the ability of the poison storage space. However, the later generations didn't know that the Snow Wolf clan actually had the purest bloodline. The Snow Wolf clan's direct descendants had far more poison storage spaces than the poison sect's direct descendants. Lil Thing hated the poison sect's direct descendants. Back then, Lil Thing had avoided Bai Yanqing and sought refuge with the Snow Wolf clan, but was rejected. Lil Thing had no choice but to stay alone in the sky pit. Later on, Mama Yunxi and the gentleman arrived. Lil Thing's memories ended here, from the time it was a naive little snow wolf until now. Lil Thing remembered everything. Slowly, it raised its head and transformed into a white wolf. It raised its head and gave a long, mournful howl. Although Lil Thing couldn't see what was happening outside, it could sense and smell that familiar scent. It was a scent that it missed and feared at the same time. This passage had been set up by the Snow Wolf clan in the past. Whether it was the blood of a Snow Wolf clan member or a direct descendant of the poison sect, anyone could open the door. This passage led to the Snow Wolf graveyard beneath the sacrificial altar. Back then, the Snow Wolf clan members and Lilthing's parents had all been killed by that mysterious force. They were all buried there, buried in a barrier that allowed them to rest in peace. Lilthing didn't know when it had started to forget these things, but it knew that it wasn't truly forgetting them. It would never remember the things it had truly forgotten. It was just trying to forget them on purpose. Because it was too sad to recall them, it was too much to bear. Thus, it could only forget. If Bai Yanqing hadn't accidentally fallen here, perhaps Lilthing would never remember these things. Gradually, Lilthing quieted down. It was waiting for Bai Yanqing to fall into the graveyard. Even more than before, it hoped that Mama Yunqi could save it. It felt like it wanted to see the place where its clansmen were buried. If a place with its clansmen and parents was home, then this graveyard was its final home. Bai Yanqing was the first to fall to the ground. As soon as his feet touched the ground, the darkness vanished, to be replaced by a grassy plain and a snowy mountain in the distance. Bai Yanqing was covered in pain and wounds, but his mind was still clear. He knew that this was either a barrier or an array formation. There was no way he could see the sky from the underground palace. He was bewildered. He'd spent so many years exploring the poison sect, but he didn't even know of this place's existence. What was this place? Was it a barrier or an array formation that he couldn't see through? Bai Yanqing couldn't see through it, but he didn't have time to think. He looked around and saw a forest, so he immediately ran over. Long Fei Yi and the rest would definitely chase after him. No matter where he was, he had to hide first. But by the time Bai Yanqing reached the forest, he was stunned. He saw rows upon rows of wordless steels, identical to the ones on the poison sect's sacrificial altar. The only difference was that each steel had 2 fangs hanging from it. This was a graveyard. Chapter 1142. If the wordless steel didn't prove anything, then the fangs on it were proof enough that this was the Snow Wolf grave. Snow wolves might belong to the wolf clan, but their fangs were much larger and sharper than regular wolf fangs. Moreover, their fangs were filled with lethal poison. Bai Yanqing had once dug up the poison sect's sacrificial altar in hopes of finding the bones of the snow wolves. After all, snow wolves had undying and indestructible bodies. Their bones were extremely valuable poison-making treasures. Unfortunately, he couldn't find any at all, so he could only give up in the end. Looking at the graveyard before him, Bai Yanqing understood that the Blood Wolf clan must have built a secret underground maze deep beneath the sacrificial altar and sealed it with a barrier. But the entrance wasn't at the altar, but at Clearbreeze Peak. If the poison sect's blood could open the barrier around the wordless steel, then it must be able to open all the other barriers here. It was very likely that his blood was the only reason he could enter the maze. If that was the case, then the entrance to the Snow Wolf grave had to be in the underground maze beneath Clearbreeze Peak. Bai Yanqing might be familiar with Clearbreeze Peak's labyrinth, but he had no idea why it was built there. Thinking about it now, the maze of mechanisms must have been built to cover the entrance to the Blood Wolf clan's graveyard. After all, the barrier arts weren't unique to Cloud Realm continent, but originated from the continent beyond the Wintercrow clan's northern ice sea. If they ran into an expert in barrier arts, they might not even need the poison sect's blood to break through the barrier. Building a labyrinth would be an extra layer of protection. Bai Yanqing suddenly remembered something and hurried forward to pick up one of the fangs. He examined it carefully to make sure there was no more poison in it before he relaxed. The poison sect's poison beast's blood was one of the main ingredients for the perplexing butterfly illusion. He'd kept Lilthing in the poison storage space because he didn't want Han Yunqi to get her hands on the beast's blood. As long as Han Yunxi could not obtain the poison beast's blood, she would never be able to break the perplexing butterfly illusion. She would never be able to create the antidote to cure his poison goo. After confirming that these fangs were not poisonous, Bai Yanqing wanted to find a place to hide. However, after walking around, he found that the enchantment was not big. It was just an unobstructed grassland and a small forest that could be seen through at a glance. As for the snow mountain in the distance, it was just an illusion that could never be reached. He had nowhere to hide. Bai Yanqing was still very calm and collected. He carefully looked at the wordless tombstones of the snow wolf grave one by one. Soon, he began to laugh sinisterly. He picked up 7 small stones and walked into the snow wolf grave. His figure could be seen flying back and forth between the wordless tombstones. Not long after, he disappeared. Not long after, Han Yunxi and the others landed. Just like Bai Yanqing, the darkness in front of them disappeared as soon as their feet touched the ground. In its place was a grassland, the sky was blue, and the snow mountain in the distance was pure and holy. Gu Beiyue looked around and said doubtfully, "It doesn't look like a formation." Long Fei Yi was very certain. "It's a barrier. Let's go to the forest in front and take a look. The two of you, stay close and don't get lost." He gripped Han Yunxi's hand even tighter. There was no place to hide in this barrier except for the forest. A barrier? Does this place have anything to do with the poison sex altar? Gu muttered to himself. When they reached the edge of the forest and saw the wordless tombstones and piles of white fangs, they immediately knew that this was the snow wolf grave. Lil Thing's emotions are very unstable. "It keeps crying," Han Yunxi said in a low voice. "Long Fei Yi, we should be in the underground palace under the altar. This barrier, how do we break it? Is there an illusion here as well?" Gu asked suspiciously. Illusions came from the heart and could reveal a lot of secrets. He really hated it. Gu looked at the blue sky and then at the holy snow mountain. He suddenly exclaimed, "This can't be an illusion created by Lil Thing, right?" Han Yunxi had the same suspicion. However, Gu Beiyue and Long Fei Ye's attention was focused on the forest. The two of them seemed to have noticed that something was off. Long Fei Yi quickly said in a low voice, "Bai Yanqing is hiding in there." Gu Beiyue smiled but didn't say anything. He knew that His Highness had noticed the same thing about the forest. Both Gu Qishao and Han Yunxi were still at a loss. The trees in this forest were sparse, so it was possible to count a few of them in total. Although there were 20 or so wordless tablets in the middle of the forest, they could be seen at a glance and there was nowhere to hide. Where was Bai Yanqing? Abruptly, Long Fei pushed Gu Qishao into the woods. As soon as Gu Qishao took a step forward, he realized something was wrong. It was an array. An array had been set up in this forest of wordless tablets. It's very possible that Bai Yanqing was the one who set up this formation. Is he hiding inside this formation? It's an array. No matter what you see or encounter, don't let go. Long Fei Yi whispered to Han Yunxi. Holding her hand, he stepped in with Gu Beiyue. Han Yunxi's face was filled with disbelief. When did this fellow and Gu Beiyue learn about arrays? Furthermore, he was able to tell even before he stepped in. After they stepped into the array, everything around them changed. They were surrounded by darkness. The grass and trees had all disappeared and were replaced by dusk. Bai Yanqing is nearby, but I don't know which direction he is in, Han Yunxi whispered. She could sense the little thing's presence. Long Fei Yi nodded and vigilantly observed the surroundings. Gu Beiyue stood to the side with a frown, seemingly calculating something. Han Yunxi knew that the two of them were looking for a way to break the array, so she didn't dare disturb them. Gu hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but whisper, "Long Fei Yi, what array is this? He had been looking at it for a long time, but he couldn't tell what array it was, let alone calculate a way to break it. Long Fei Yi didn't say anything and continued to look left and right at the disorderly wordless tablets. Seventh young master, this is one of the most dangerous arrays in the Chiman sect. It's very dangerous. You and the princess shouldn't move. Gu Beiyue lowered his voice. Could it be the 7 kills array? Gu was alarmed. Gu Beiyue nodded and motioned for 7th young master to keep quiet. Gu really didn't dare to make a sound. The 7 kills array was different from other arrays. The person who said it had to stay in the array, otherwise it would break apart. At this time, who knew if Bai Yanqing was watching them from somewhere? Han Yunxi whispered, "You've learned about arrays too." Gu was about to answer, but he thought for a while and shook his head. I know a little. I haven't learned it seriously. Han Yunxi didn't ask any more questions. Gu Qishao felt gloomy. They had both learned it for 3 months, but why was there such a big difference in their standards? Although he had been looking for people all over the world these 3 months and hadn't been learning all the time, Long Fei Yi had personally gone to the battlefield to kill enemies, while Gu Beiyue had been busy cleaning up the mess in Tianan. How the hell did these 2 guys learn it? Could it be that they had hired a famous expert? However, Bai Yanqing was a descendant of the Feng clan and was an expert in this field. Who else in this world was more capable than him? The 7 kills array was the best of the hundreds of arrays. It wasn't easy to set up and even harder to break. The reason why it was called the 7 kills array was because once you entered this array, you would encounter an evil spirit every 7 steps. Each evil spirit represented a danger. As for what kind of danger it was, it depended on the ability of the person who set it up. Bai Yanqing's power couldn't be underestimated. If they didn't move, they would never be able to break the array and would be trapped forever. In fact, wasting time was the most energy-efficient way to break the array, and it was also the smartest way. The person who set up the array couldn't leave the array. If they didn't eat or drink, they would be exhausted to death in 3 days. Unfortunately, they had encountered an undying and indestructible formation master. They simply couldn't afford to waste time. The general 8 trigrams array was divided into 8 gates according to the 8 trigrams: rest, life, injury, stop, view, death, shock, and open. The 7 kills array had another characteristic, which was that there were only 7 gates. The death gate was hidden in the other 7 gates and wasn't fixed. The death gate would change according to the direction of the intruder. It could be hidden in the life gate, which was the life and death gate, or it could be hidden in the injury gate, which was the death gate. In other words, the 7 kills array wasn't set up according to the 8 trigrams array. Therefore, even if someone who was proficient in arrays entered, they might not even be able to figure out the location, let alone break the array. Long Fei Yi and Gu were seriously pondering the array, while Han Yunxi and Han Yunxi were vigilant of their surroundings. And Bai Yanqing was indeed hiding in the dark. At this very moment, the life gate was the death gate. The life gate was hidden in the death gate. He was lying in ambush, waiting for Long Fei Yi and the rest to break in. Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue were able to break the 2 arrays at the entrance of the maze. Bai Yanqing was surprised and also impressed. But this time, he absolutely didn't believe that Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue had the ability to break into this array. Even if their abilities were monstrous and they could find the location of the life gate, so what? They were still courting death. If he didn't die, if he didn't leave, this life and death gate array would exist forever, unbreakable. He wanted to see how Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi would be able to dual cultivate after trapping them for a few months. Bai Yanqing waited, but after a long time, Han Yunxi and the rest still didn't move a single step. Bai Yanqing hid behind the wordless tablet in the dark, his face filled with contempt and disdain. He was still thinking that they might be able to find the location of the life gate if they spent 1 or 2 days' time, but he didn't expect that after entering for so long, they actually stood in the same spot, not even daring to move a single step. From the looks of it, Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue breaking the array in the maze back then was very likely a blind cat catching a dead mouse, just coincidentally bumping into a familiar array. He really overestimated these two youngsters. Seeing that they still didn't dare to move, Bai Yanqing was originally rather prepared, but after waiting for such a long time, he slowly relaxed. He thought that perhaps he could have a good rest and play with them again. If they didn't move, he also had a way to torture them. However, not long later, Long Fei Ye's voice was heard, "Gu Beiyue, I've found the location of the life gate. What about you?" Bai Yanqing was first shocked, but then he sneered secretly. This kind of trick, how could he believe it? Long Fei Yi didn't move a single step, so it was impossible for him to find the location of the life gate. Moreover, even if he really found it, would he dare to say it out loud? Chapter 1143. Bai Yanqing didn't believe that Long Fei Yi had found the life door, and thought that Long Fei Yi was deliberately saying it for him to hear, to lure him out. However, Gu Beiyue replied, "I've found it too, it's on the Kuan position." Once these words came out, Bai Yanqing was stunned. The life door was indeed on the Kuan position, which was also where he was hiding. They hadn't even taken a single step, yet he could tell just by looking. Bai Yanqing's face was filled with disbelief. If he hadn't heard it with his own ears, he would never believe it. Shocked, Bai Yanqing became alert, and at the same time, a sinister cold light surfaced in his eyes. Since they were so capable to find the life door, he would definitely stay here and wait for them to come over. This time, he wanted Long Fei Yi, this stinky brat who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, to know what it meant to be caught in a trap of one's own making, and what it meant to seek death. The life door was also the death door, and this place was definitely the most dangerous place in the 7 kills array. As long as Long Fei Yi and the other 3 walked over, he had full confidence in separating them. In the abyss, Long Fei Yi had made him beg so many times. This time, he wanted Long Fei Yi to kneel down and beg him. Bai Yanqing's anger was burning fiercely. He stood behind the wordless monument, and slightly turned his body, and saw Long Fei Yi and the rest from afar. But who knew that Gu Beiyue and Gu had disappeared? Long Fei Yi said, "Life and death door, this array is unsolvable. There's only one way to break it, and that's to change it." What? When these words came out, Bai Yanqing was so shocked that he was dumbstruck. Not only was he shocked, but he was even frightened. One had to know that this unsolvable 7 kills array was the most profound array he had learned in his life. It was his greatest pride, and also his trump card. How did Long Fei Yi know? How did he see through it? No. While Bai Yanqing was still in shock, Long Fei Yi had already thrown a stone that he had been hiding in his hand towards Bai Yanqing. Formations were like a game of chess. To an expert, a small change, a small step, could disrupt the overall situation and even create a new one. The disguised wordless steels beside Bai Yanqing instantly disappeared, leaving only one wordless steel in the darkness. Bai Yanqing was still standing in the same spot, his heart filled with shock. Long Fei Yi actually changed the entire 7 kills formation, restoring the original 8 trigrams position and the 8 gates. The gate of life and the gate of death were not in the same position. In other words, Bai Yanqing's position was the death gate. And the master of this formation was no longer Bai Yanqing, but Long Fei Yi. Bai Yanqing was so shocked that his mind went blank. Even in the history of the Wind Clan, there had never been such an expert of the Chimen Duinjia technique. Although the art of controlling the wind was the innate talent of the Wind Clan, the Chimanduinja technique was just a compulsory homework for every generation of the Wind Clan. But for hundreds of years, the Wind Clan had always been proud of the Chimanduinja technique. Whenever the Chimanduinja technique was mentioned, people would first think of the Wind Clan. Today, he, the head of the Wind Clan, would actually fall in the formation that he was most proficient in. Not to mention whether it would be a laughing stock if it spread out, even Bai Yanqing himself could not accept this matter. Such a blow was too great. Once the Death Gate was formed, Bai Yanqing's surroundings suddenly became cold and gloomy. There seemed to be a person in the darkness that could charge at him at any time. Very soon, this person transformed into several figures. Bai Yanqing, all of this was an illusion. There was only one person lurking in the darkness. But he could not tell. A gate was a trap. A trap hid at least one real person. All the other dangers were illusions. Who would Long Fei hide in the Death Gate's trap? In the midst of Bai Yanqing's panic, he still retained the last bit of calmness. This person was extremely likely to be Gu. He did not die, but he would be bound by Gu's thorny vines. His only way was to leave. Bai Yanqing hurriedly escaped from the Death Gate. And the moment he reached the center of the array formation, he took a look and nearly collapsed. Long Fei actually changed the 7 Carnage array that he was most proud of to the 9 Palaces 8 Trigrams array. The 9 Palaces 8 Trigrams array was precisely what he used in the backyard of General Mu Manor back then. It was precisely the array formation that trapped the 4 of them back then. Since Long Fei had such a tremendous ability to change the 7 Carnage array, then he had the ability to lay down an even more powerful array formation. Why did he lay down such an easy-to-crack array formation? Just what did he want to do? Even if Bai Yanqing could see the life gate with a single glance, he still did not dare move. He pondered over it and was on guard. Just what kind of trap did Long Fei have for him? Long Fei had already left the array while protecting Han Yunxi. At this moment, the husband and wife were standing outside the forest. In Han Yunxi's eyes, she could only see the forest and the graveyard. As for Long Fei, he could see Bai Yanqing's every move in the palm of his hand. The life and death of this array was in his hands. Bai Yanqing, this prince was defeated by this array formation in the past. Today, I'll return it to you. Long Fei said. Bai Yanqing's heart was already restless, but he still did not move. He said, "You think you can trap old man to death like this? Since you didn't kill this prince in the past, this prince will give you a reminder. Gu is at the Death Gate and Gu Beiyue is at the Life Gate. Let's see if you dare charge in." Long Fei said. Once these words were said, Han Yunxi was first shocked. She looked at Long Fei in disbelief. Gu Beiyue had already come out with them. The only one left in the array was Gu. Moreover, she had heard Long Fei order Gu to guard the Death Gate, so the Life Gate should be empty. As long as they found it, they could easily leave. Long Fei doing this, wasn't it too risky? Seeing Long Fei's serious and cold eyes looking at the forest, Han Yunxi did not dare disturb him. She looked at Gu Beiyue with a worried gaze, but Gu Beiyue just smiled without saying a word. Han Yunxi raised her head to look at Long Fei. Long Fei rubbed her bangs and did not say a word. All right, since these two fellows were so calm, why should she be anxious? Let's just watch the show. Inside the array, Bai Yanqing did not reply for a long time. He could guess that Gu was hiding in the Death Gate, but as for the situation at the Life Gate, he was unable to determine. Perhaps there was another mystery in the Life Gate. Or perhaps Long Fei was just deliberately mystifying him. This array was just a normal 9 Palace 8 Trigrams array. As long as he walked out of the Life Gate, he could break it. This was a contest of heart skills. How should he choose? Bai Yanqing, why, this prince is giving you a way out, you won't take it. Long Fei Yi sneered, if you don't leave, don't blame this prince for being merciless. A complicated look flashed past Bai Yanqing's eyes and he actually turned around to walk towards the death gate. Rather than letting Long Fei Yi trap him with an array that he was not familiar with, he might as well take a gamble. He gambled that Long Fei Yi was deliberately mystifying him. To break this movement technique, it was definitely not the life gate but the death gate. Gu must be hiding in the life gate and the one hiding in the death gate should be Gu Beiyue. He's walking through the death gate. Long Fei Yi calmly said. Gu Beiyue gave a faint smile, as gentle as the spring breeze. It made people unable to tell if he was merciful or ruthless. Han Yunxi was overjoyed. Although she did not understand, she knew that as long as Bai Yanqing walked through the death gate, he would definitely meet Gu. In this place, once Bai Yanqing was trapped by Gu, there was nothing he could do. Very quickly, Gu's wild laughter came from the array. He and Bai Yanqing began to fight. In the darkness, thorny vines surrounded them from all directions. One by one, Gu stood around them, laughing arrogantly. Bai Yanqing could not tell which one was the real Gu, nor could he tell which were the real thorny vines. He held the treasure sword in his hand and desperately slashed. Sometimes he hit the thorny vines, sometimes he hit empty air. Ha, 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 Bai Yanqing, don't be anxious. Father has plenty of time to slowly play with you. Father won't be able to trap you that quickly. Gu laughed loudly. Bai Yanqing's face was pale. Panting, he turned around and escaped from the death gate. He did not know how pathetic he was at this moment. Once he escaped from the death gate, he immediately flew towards the life gate. Long Fei Yi did not lie to him. He was deliberately mystifying and playing with him. The person guarding the life gate was really Gu Beiyue. To deal with Gu Beiyue, he only needed to use poison. No matter how many figures he saw, he did not need to care. He only needed to use poison. However, when Bai Yanqing walked towards the life gate, he saw Gu standing in front of him and smiling at him. Old fool, father said that today I will play with you properly. Why don't you believe me? No. Bai Yanqing exclaimed. Why was Gu here? In every position in the array, every person who was hiding could not move casually. Especially the life and death gates. Once they moved, it would definitely affect the operation of the entire array. Gu was guarding the death gate. Why would he come to the life gate? Gu was at the life gate. Then where was the death gate? Could it be that Gu Beiyue had gone to the death gate? Bai Yanqing did not believe what he saw. He brandished his sword and slashed out. Gu stood in his original position and allowed him to slash. It did not harm his life. Could it be? Could it be that he saw wrongly? That Gu in the death gate was not real? Could it be that the truth was that Gu was guarding the life gate while Gu Beiyue was guarding the death gate? This was an array with the death gate as the exit. Bai Yanqing immediately retreated out of the life gate and dashed towards the death gate. But as soon as he entered the death door, he saw Gu Qishao standing there with a brazen smile. Bai Yanqing slashed out with his sword. Gu still stood in his original position, laughing arrogantly. What was going on? Bai Yanqing did not believe that he could not figure it out. He retreated once again and dashed towards the life gate. But Gu was still waiting for him there. Bai Yanqing was in a mess. He was almost driven mad. In the array that he was best at, he was played by Long Fei Yi like a deserter. At this moment, Long Fei Yi had already explained the mystery of this array to Han Yunxi. This array was very similar to the 9 Palaces 8 trigrams array that Bai Yanqing had set up previously. But it was not the 9 palaces 8 trigrams array. This array was the same as the 7 killings array. It was a deadlock with no solution. The reason why there was no solution was because this array's life and death gate changed according to the intruder. When an intruder entered the life gate was death. Once the intruder entered the death gate became life. This array could only be modified based on the 7 killings array's life and death gate. Bai Yanqing was purely spinning a cocoon around himself. Unless Long Fei Yi broke the array, he would never be able to leave. If he did not go through the life and death gate, he would never be able to leave through the other 6 gates. And the life and death gates were all guarded by Gu. So Bai Yanqing only had 2 choices. One was to be trapped forever. The other was to be tied up by Gu. Ha, this is too fun. Han Yunqi laughed loudly. Do you like it? Long Fei Yi gave a rare smile. I like it very much. Teach me when you have time. I also want to learn this strange technique. Han Yunqi's heart was itching. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi said seriously, take it as my apology to you and your child. I could not break the array and save you. Chapter 1144. Facing Long Fei Ye's apology, Han Yunqi's heart was filled with gratitude. She looked at him foolishly, not knowing what to say. She knew that Chimen Duanjia wasn't something that anyone could learn, and it wasn't something that could be mastered in a year or so. How long had it been since she was kidnapped? Not only did he learn it to perfection, but he also put in so much effort. Han Yunqi stood on her tiptoes and lightly kissed Long Fei's cheek. In a low voice, she murmured, I forgive you for your crimes. Long Fei smiled, finally feeling a little better after suppressing his emotions for so long. Let's look for the exit, Han Yunqi said seriously. Gu Beiyue then spoke, Princess, since the blood of the direct descendant activated the spirit formation gate, I'm afraid that only the blood of the spirit formation can open it, right? Last time, they encountered an illusion spirit formation created by the human heart at the altar, but now, it wasn't an illusion created by the human heart. This spirit formation was the spirit formation that protected the snow wolf tomb, so it couldn't be broken. They could only leave by opening the exit. Having Gu guard Bai Yanqing, Han Yunqi and the others returned to the place where they fell. She dripped her blood on the ground, but who knew that before the blood touched the ground, it disappeared into thin air. The 3 of them thought that the spirit formation gate was going to open again, but they waited for a long time, but the spirit formation didn't move at all. How could this be? The blood disappeared into thin air, so it must have been absorbed by the spirit formation. But why didn't the spirit formation open? Han Yunqi didn't believe it, so she tried a few more times, but there was no result. Do we need Bai Yanqing's blood? Gu Beiyue quickly asked. Han Yunqi had already collected the blood of the poison Gu human, and later, for future research, she secretly hid some in the poison storage space in the abyss. She took out a few drops, and found that Bai Yanqing's blood was also collected by the spirit formation, but the spirit formation still couldn't open. How could this be? Gu Beiyue felt uneasy. Long Fei Yi also realized that there was a big problem. If they couldn't get out, wouldn't they be trapped here with Bai Yanqing for the rest of their lives? Does Bai Yanqing know? Han Yunqi asked suspiciously. When they returned to the forest, Bai Yanqing realized that he had been tricked by Long Fei Yi. He was so tired that he was gasping for breath. Finally, he stopped running between the gates of life and death and stood in the middle of the formation to rest. Han Yunqi knew that if she asked Bai Yanqing directly, Bai Yanqing would use this to threaten them. She said in a low voice, Long Fei Yi, we have to set a trap for him. Long Fei Yi whispered a few words, and Han Yunqi and Gu Beiyue understood. Gu Beiyue quickly and quietly sneaked into the formation to find Gu. After he came back, Gu took action. A thorny vine quietly stretched out from the gate of death, wanting to sneak attack Bai Yanqing. Bai Yanqing had already noticed it, and a sneer flashed across his eyes. He knew that his chance had come. As long as he had the chance to catch Gu and make Gu leave the gate of death, this formation would reveal a flaw, and he would have a way to break the formation. Although Bai Yanqing hated Gu's mouth, compared to Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue, he was still willing to fight Gu. After all, dealing with an impulsive guy like Gu was much easier than dealing with sly old foxes like Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue. If Gu attacked him openly, he might not be able to defeat the thorny vine, but if Gu launched a sneak attack, then he would be in for a fight. Bai Yanqing allowed the thorny vine to approach him. Just as the thorny vine was about to wrap around his body, he suddenly grabbed it and immediately retreated. At the same time, he pulled the thorny vine fiercely, and in an instant, he pulled Gu out from the gate of death. Actually, Gu had been waiting for Bai Yanqing to do this. He could have broken the thorny vine, but he still pretended to be angry and said angrily, "Bai Yanqing, you tricked me." Bai Yanqing had no time to argue with Gu. As soon as Gu left the gate of death, the entire formation changed immediately. Bai Yanqing glanced to the side and immediately fled. After Bai Yanqing escaped, he did not see Han Yunxi and the rest. Only Gu's thorny vines chased after him. Bai Yanqing did not care so much. He fled to the place where he fell and immediately cut his finger, dripping blood. But soon, he was shocked. It was his blood that activated this formation. Logically speaking, his blood should be able to activate it again. Why was his blood absorbed before it fell to the ground, and the formation did not move at all? Bai Yanqing and Han Yunxi's reactions were different. He did not believe it and tried again, but still failed. At this time, Han Yunxi and the rest chased over from the small forest. It had to be said that Bai Yanqing's actions surprised Han Yunxi and the rest. "Bai Yanqing, you can't get out either," Han Yunxi muttered. Bai Yanqing immediately retreated. He understood what was going on. Gu deliberately let him out by accident. This group of people had tricked him again. Bai Yanqing was angry, but soon he laughed loudly. "Hee, looks like you guys can't get out either. Great." Bai Yanqing stopped retreating and laughed wildly. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, in the end, Old Man won. Old Man won. You guys just wait for the great limit of dual cultivation. Old Man, just you wait. Just you wait. Ha ha ha. Han Yunxi's group of 4 stood in place in silence. Bai Yanqing was right in front of them, laughing madly as he lost his sense of measure. Everything he did, wasn't it to scheme against Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi? Wasn't it to make the two of them fail in dual cultivation and go crazy and kill each other? After going around in circles and fighting so many times, he did not expect that after he failed, he still won. Old Man won. Old Man won. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, Old Man, let me tell you, Old Man has been waiting for this day for a long time. A long time. How happy was Bai Yanqing? Or rather, how crazy was he? Why did he do this? Why did he hate the two of them so much? Han Yunxi frowned as she looked at Bai Yanqing's complacent expression. She only felt that he was pitiful and hateful. Long Fei Yi held on to the rope on his body. Other than contempt, there was only contempt in his deep and cold eyes. One must know that the black cloth he was carrying on his back was not a guqin, but a sword. And not only the Ganjiang sword, but also the newly cast Immerse sword that he wanted to give to Han Yunxi. Where did Bai Yanqing get the confidence to think that their dual cultivation would fail? Han Yunxi felt that Bai Yanqing was pitiful and hateful, but Long Feiyi felt that Bai Yanqing was like a jumping clown. He expressionlessly looked at Bai Yanqing and casually threw the profound frost sword to Gu Beiyue. With his other hand, he untied the rope and took out the Ganjiang sword and the newly cast sword. Ganjiang. Bai Yanqing still did not believe it. He had already expected that the Ganjiang sword at the top of Heaven Mountain was a fake. Long Feiyi did not answer him. Instead, he lifted the black cloth. In an instant, the Ganjiang sword and the newly cast Immerse sword were revealed. Bai Yanqing recognized the Ganjiang sword. His attention was immediately attracted by the newly cast sword. A feeling of unease immediately welled up in his heart. He was also a swordsman. He could see that this unsharpened sword was not ordinary. His face finally revealed an expression of fear. He began to retreat. Impossible, what's impossible? Long Feiyi asked. I don't believe it. It's impossible. He roared. If this sword had been sharpened, he would have believed that Long Feiyi and the others had found a sword to capture Immerse's sword soul. However, this sword had not even been sharpened. It was clearly a newly cast sword. How could they have forged such a sword in such a short time? Even if it was placed next to the King of Swords, Ganjiang, this unsharpened sword would not be inferior at all. Long Feiyi would not waste time explaining to Bai Yanqing how this sword was forged. He still looked at Bai Yanqing and casually handed the sword to Han Yunxi, saying, "This is for you. You can sharpen it. There is no diamond here, but you can make do with your undying body." What? When Long Feiyi said this, even Gu Beiyue and Gu were dumbstruck. This guy did not sharpen the sword in the medicine-requesting cave because he wanted to keep it for Han Yunxi to play with. Wasn't this gift a little too domineering? He actually wanted to sharpen it on Bai Yanqing's undying body. This, ha 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 ha. Gu finally could not help but laugh. Long Feiyi, I admire you. I admire you. Ha ha ha. Gu Beiyue laughed but did not say anything. Han Yunxi did not laugh. She used the power of nirvana to hold the sword and said coldly, Long Feiyi, I like this gift very much. Even if she could not kill Bai Yanqing, she could still toy with him to death. Bai Yuqiao's grudge, Ning Jing's grudge, Little Yu Er's grudge, and the suffering of all the innocent people in the world who were suffering from the chaos of war. Today, she was going to take revenge on Bai Yanqing with her own hands. Han Yunxi held the sword in one hand and hugged Long Feiyi with the other. She let Long Feiyi carry her up into the sky and said coldly, Bai Yanqing, this princess will use you as a sacrifice to this sword today. After saying this, the power of nirvana instantly poured into the sword. The sword rose and fell fiercely. It was not a slash or a stab, but a cold sweep across Bai Yanqing's body and rubbed against it. The sharp air produced by the friction between the power of nirvana and Bai Yanqing's body could sharpen the sword. The thick blade had not been sharpened yet. How many times would it take to sharpen it into a sharp and thin blade on Bai Yanqing's body? Bai Yanqing was in so much pain that he almost couldn't stand. He never thought that things would turn out like this. His mind was blank as he turned around and fled. Long Feiyi immediately chased after him with Han Yunxi. Not long after, the sword swept across again. Gu Beiyue and Gu watched from afar and did not chase after them. Seventh young master, let's go take a look in the forest, Gu Beiyue said with a smile. With His Highness and the princess around, and this was a space where they could not escape, he could wait for the princess and the others to sharpen the sword without worry. As Gu walked into the forest, he summoned Immerse's sword spirit and muttered to himself, I really can't bear to part with it. Without it, wouldn't my martial arts be too weak? Yes. Gu Beiyue was very honest. Gu frowned and sized him up. Gu Beiyue, you can't be as unkind as Long Fei Yi. This easygoing doctor had followed Long Fei Yi for a long time and had picked up all the bad things. Gu Beiyue seriously inspected the snow wolf grave. Gu sat cross-legged and watched Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi chase after Bai Yanqing to sharpen the sword. His heart itched to go over and ask Poison Lass to let him sharpen the sword a few times. However, in view of Long Fei Yi's deterrence, he still waited obediently. Chapter 1145. If Bai Yanqing was like a deserter in the array formation, then at this moment, he was like a stray dog being chased by Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. One had to know that he was so pleased with himself just now. He must have never thought that there would be a day when he would be in such a sorry state. The sword and his body fiercely rubbed against each other again and again, causing him unbearable pain. This kind of pain was far more unbearable than the suffering in the abyss. Finally, he couldn't help but shout, "Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, old man has lost." Did he take the initiative to beg for mercy? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were indifferent and continued. "Old man, I beg you. Old man has lost." Bai Yanqing had no choice but to say the word beg. However, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi only pretended not to hear him. Han Yunxi's sword continued to swing. The originally thick blade was almost worn down, and its sharpness was gradually revealed. Bai Yanqing's word beg was too cheap in their eyes. How could it compare to Ning Jing's life, Tang Li's tears, Little Yu's suffering, Han Yunxi's fetus risk, and all the suffering? If the word beg could redeem everything, then how many people in this world would be evil? It would have been fine if Bai Yanqing didn't beg. Once he begged, Han Yunxi's resentment in her heart grew even stronger. Not only did the sword in her hand not stop, it became faster and faster. Bai Yanqing didn't even have the strength to escape. At this moment, he would rather die, rather be killed by the sword. At this moment, being undying and indestructible was not his heaven, but his hell. "Girl, for the sake of your mother, spare me." Finally, Bai Yanqing gave up all his dignity and face. "Why should I? Don't tell me my mother is already dead. Even if she's standing here today, I won't let you off." Han Yunxi angrily rebuked. "Girl, your mother and I were originally in love with each other. The old man had never done anything wrong to her. She was the one who had wronged the old man. She was the one who had wronged me. It was her." Bai Yanqing choked with sobs. "It has nothing to do with me." Han Yunxi's sword didn't stop. "Old man doesn't want to lie to her. Old man told her the truth about the civil war between the Black Clan and the Wind Clan. She actually. It was hard to tell whether Bai Yanqing was crying or laughing, but the resentment was obvious. The old man didn't hide anything from her, but she treated the old man as a traitor and an enemy. What did the Wind Clan do back then have to do with old man? Based on what did she blame everything on the old man, based on what? Bai Yanqing seemed like he was crazy as he roared at Han Yunxi, as if Han Yunxi was Muaxin. But he quickly began to cry again. "Based on what can you be together? Han Yunxi, you are Muaxin's daughter. Based on what can you be together with the East Qin crown prince despite your hatred? Based on what?" The truth of the civil war between the Eastern and Western Qin had yet to be revealed. The Eastern and Western Qin had an irreconcilable national hatred, and the two camps were like fire and water. However, these two people, the only descendants of the two royal families, were actually able to disregard their hatred and stand side by side. How could he accept this? Muaxin had rejected him and even hated him, running away from him. However, his daughter had turned her back on the entire Western Qin camp to be with the East Qin crown prince. He would never allow this. He wanted Muaxayan to pay the price. But by the time he found Muaxayan's whereabouts, not only had she become Han Kongan's wife, she had already died in childbirth. No one knew how long he cried, how long he resented, and how much he hated after learning of this. Back then, Muaxayan wanted to leave him, but he refused. In order to obtain her, he even drugged her with an aphrodisiac. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. A black-robed man who had suddenly barged into the poison sect's forbidden grounds had saved her. He didn't know who that man was, but he remembered that he had chased them all the way to the forest near the altar. He had searched the mountains and plains for an entire night without finding anyone. The next afternoon, he had intercepted that black-robed man at the foot of the mountain. He didn't know who that man was, but he was certain that he was an orphan of the poison sect. Otherwise, there was no way he would be so familiar with the forest near the altar. He had intercepted the black-robed man, but there was no sign of Muaxayan. When he couldn't get anything out of him, he had killed the man in a fit of rage. But he regretted it as soon as he did, because he searched for days and nights without finding Muaxayan's whereabouts. It wasn't until 2 years later that he happened to hear rumors in Medical City that Tianning's Han clan's Han Kongan and Lady Lianxin were having an affair. Lady Lianxin had spent a lot of effort to help him get a position as a director of the medical academy. That was when he began to suspect that Muaxayan had something to do with it. After all, Lady Lianxin's position in the medical academy should have been Muaxayan's. If Muaxayan hadn't barged into the poison sect and met him, she would have followed him. Lady Lianxin would never have made it to Medical City. Lady Lianxin had always looked down on those below her, so how could she have taken a fancy to Han Kongan? He had rushed to the Han estate as soon as possible. But instead of Muaxayan, he saw her memorial tablet and the daughter she had sacrificed her life to give birth to. From that moment on, he had probably lost his mind. No matter how much he resented or hated her, as long as that woman was still alive, he could still maintain a bit of reason. But she wasn't here anymore. She'd left without a word. She'd left for good. She'd rather choose a useless man like Han Kongan who relied on women to climb up the social ladder than accept him. She was even willing to give birth to Han Kongan's child. He'd almost killed that child, but he didn't know why he hadn't done it then. He returned to the poison sect's forbidden grounds and opened up the poison plants in the sacrificial altar. He found the recipe for poison goo humans and raised himself to look neither human nor ghost. He hated Muaxayan, the 2 imperial clans, the 7 noble families, and everything about the great Qin Empire. He hated the world. After he began to search for the 7 noble families, he wanted to destroy everything and this continent. He took in Jun Yixia as his disciple and planted Helian Zuexiang in the Han estate. He killed the true sect master of the evil sword school and replaced him. He wanted Muaxayan's daughter to grow up well and publicize her status as Western Qin's princess. Everyone in the world would fight over her. But he never expected Tianning's Duke of Qin to be the East Qin crown prince. Jun Yixia's discovery of the mermaid blood had allowed him to track down Long Fei Ye's identity. This made him even more excited. He wanted Muaxayan's daughter to have a taste of her lover's hatred. That taste had been bestowed upon him by her mother and had almost ruined his entire life. When he fought with Han Yunxi, he discovered that Han Yunxi actually knew poison arts and had a poison storage space. Only then did he realize that Han Yunxi wasn't Han Kongan's daughter, but the daughter of the man who'd saved Muaxayan all those years ago. His mother was a descendant of the Wind clan while his father was a descendant of the poison sect's main bloodline. He'd always assumed that he was the only direct descendant of the poison sect, but never expected that man to have a direct bloodline as well. He'd killed that man with his own hands, but he still couldn't find out his origins. He only hated Muaxayan. That woman would rather submit to a strange man than accept him. Damned girl, tell that to old man. What right does your mother have to blame everything that happened to the Wind Clan on Old Man's head? Why? This isn't fair. Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi quietly listened to Bai Yanqing's mutterings. They finally understood the grudge between Bai Yanqing and Mu Axian. So Mu Axian really had died in childbirth. She'd been too paranoid. So her father had long died to Bai Yanqing's sword and she'd never been able to find him again. So Bai Yanqing's love had turned to hate, but did that give him the right to hurt an innocent person? Bai Yanqing asked her why, but she had to ask Bai Yanqing why. Why do you think you don't have to shoulder the Wind Clan's crimes, but come to me to collect the debt my mother owes you? Han Yunxi didn't pity Bai Yanqing, only rage. Didn't he understand the principle of don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you? Bai Yanqing, do you know the real reason my mother didn't accept you? Han Yunxi asked coldly. Bai Yanqing looked up at Han Yunxi, who only laughed coldly. The Wind Clan's instigation of internal strife in the Great Qin Empire was only an excuse. The real reason was, my mother didn't really like you. Long Feiyi only scorned Bai Yanqing even more. Yunxi, this kind of person isn't worthy of your mother's love. If Mu Axian hadn't died in childbirth, would a madman like Bai Yanqing, with no principles or bottom lines, have let her go? Back then, he'd even drugged Mu Axian to get his hands on her. Bai Yanqing, a woman's betrayal only proves your incompetence. Long Feiyi's lofty contempt stunned Bai Yanqing. At that moment, he actually felt like a pitiful worm. You shut up. Bai Yanqing flew into a rage out of humiliation and suddenly rushed over. Long Feiyi immediately retreated with Han Yunxi, but Han Yunxi didn't show any mercy with her sword. She not only used her Nirvana heart arts, but her Phoenix heart arts as well. Her sword slashed out from the side as the two powers collided violently with Bai Yanqing's body, creating a powerful gust of wind. Amidst this gust of wind, the sword's edge suddenly blossomed with a dazzling light. The sword's edge had opened. The powerful sword on immediately knocked Bai Yanqing far away. Han Yunxi held him up while Long Feiyi helped. Gu and Gu Beiyue rushed over as soon as they saw the sword on. Seventh young master, quick, the sword's opened. Gu Beiyue said urgently. Poison lass, are you ready? Gu Qishao asked. No problem. Han Yunxi was very confident. Gu immediately summoned Immerse's sword soul and poured it into the sword. It had to be said that Immerse's sword soul seemed to have a mind of its own. It actually circled around Long Feiyi's Ganjiang sword before flowing into the newly forged sword. Han Yunxi didn't have to use much strength. The moment Immerse's sword soul entered the sword, Gu chased after Bai Yanqing. He had to take advantage of the fact that Bai Yanqing was heavily injured to tie up Bai Yanqing. Immerse's sword soul quickly fused with the sword, turning it into a true Immerse sword. And after the sword's soul fused with the sword's light became even more powerful. It was so powerful that Han Yunxi almost couldn't hold on to it. At this moment, everyone realized that Han Yunxi hadn't really subdued Immerse's sword. The real thing was that Han Yunxi had to put in the effort to subdue. Long Feiyi and Gu Beiyue were quite worried when they saw this powerful sword's light. With Han Yunxi's strength, there was naturally no problem. What they were worried about was whether the little fellow in Han Yunxi's stomach would be injured by this power. Chapter 1146. Han Yunxi seemed to be worried about the child in her womb. She held Immerse's sword with both hands and looked at Long Feiyi inquisitively. This was also a risk. She gave him the choice. Long Feiyi knitted his brows and looked into the distance. He saw that the heavily injured Bai Yanqing was once again tied up by Gu's vines. At this time, he was at a disadvantage. Countless vines were flying all over the sky. Long Fei Yi made a decision. He held Han Yunxi's hand that was holding the sword and said seriously, "Dual cultivation, I will help you." Dual cultivation. This guy actually wanted her to dual cultivate while subduing Immerse's sword. This, excellent idea. Gu Beiyue was overjoyed. He could finally retreat to the side and guard at ease. Just be obedient. Long Fei Yi said softly. He hugged Han Yunxi from behind. At the same time, he held Han Yunxi's hands that were holding the sword with both hands. Just like before, dual cultivation started with cultivating the heart. The two of them quietly felt each other's existence and aura. What was different from before was that Han Yunxi used the power of the phoenix this time, and not the nirvana power of Heaven Mountain. The vigorous power of the phoenix lingered on Immerse's sword spirit. Very quickly, Long Fei Yi's lustbite power slowly covered it and locked it on his shoulder. The two powers seemed to have spirituality as they intertwined with each other like lovers glued to each other. The originally powerful baleful aura of Immerse's soul seemed to be influenced by these two powers and gradually calmed down. After a while, Long Fei Yi let go of Han Yunxi's hand. The moment he let go, Immerse's sword suddenly shook. Long Fei Yi's hand continued to cover it. Han Yunxi said softly, "It's okay, I can do it." Only then did Long Fei stop worrying. He unsheathed the Ganjiang sword and flipped to land in front of Han Yunxi. He signaled Han Yunxi with his eyes. Seeing Han Yunxi nod, he attacked with his sword. Han Yunxi had to subdue Immerse's sword while dealing with Long Fei Yi. She was not as relaxed as before, but she was still able to wield Immerse's sword. She held her sword with both hands to block. Suddenly, there was a loud clang. As the two swords clashed, Ganjiang and Immerse finally reunited. Immerse's treasured sword actually weakened in an instant, as if it had submitted. Han Yunxi was overjoyed. She let go of one of her hands and began to brandish Immerse's sword towards Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi was able to react with ease. The two looked like they were fighting fiercely, but it was more like a sword dance. They switched from defense to offense, and from offense to defense. Gu Beiyue watched from the side with a smile on his lips. It was as warm as a breeze. Seeing the princess's reaction, he knew that the princess had successfully overcome the crisis and subdued Immerse's treasured sword. Actually, it was more accurate to say that His Highness used the Ganjiang sword to help subdue Immerse's treasured sword. Therefore, if His Highness used Immerse's treasured sword as a weapon, he would be able to use it freely. However, it would not be so easy for the princess to use the Ganjiang sword. In the future, even if the princess cultivated to the peak of Phoenix power, her power would still be inferior to His Highness's by a large margin. However, he knew that the only person in this world who could subdue His Highness was the princess. Gu Beiyue was pondering when Gu suddenly shouted at him from afar, "Gu Beiyue, throw me some rations, I'm so hungry." Gu Beiyue turned around to look and could not help but laugh out loud. Gu used thorny vines to tie Bai Yanqing to his back tightly. Even Bai Yanqing's mouth was sealed, leaving only his eyes open. Seeing that Bai Yanqing was tied up tightly, Gu Beiyue was relieved and allowed Gu to take the rations from the bamboo tower that Gu Beiyue had left at the side. Once the rations arrived, Gu was overjoyed. He actually sat with his back facing Long Fei Yi and the others. In this way, Bai Yanqing, who was on his back, could see Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's sword dance in the air. Bai Yanqing could obviously see that Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were going through the final stage of dual cultivation. He was filled with unwillingness, and his heart was so stifled that it was about to explode. However, he could not even speak, let alone stop them. Gu had arranged an excellent vantage point for him, and he could only watch. Gu actually could not bear to eat the rations, but his blood had to support so many thorny vines. If he did not eat anything, he would really faint from hunger. He told himself that these rations were for Poison Lass, and he would only eat a little. As he ate, he did not forget to chat with Bai Yanqing. "Old thing, are you hungry? It doesn't feel good to starve to death. Old thing, why are you so useless? You spent so much effort to stop Poison Lass from dual cultivating, but she is dual cultivating right in front of your eyes. Why don't you go and stop it? Go on. Hurry up and go." Sigh. "Old thing, you have been reduced to such a state. Do you have any strength? Is there any meaning to it? Why don't you just go and die?" "Oh, right, I forgot that you can't die. Old thing, do you know that I'm especially afraid of pain? Are you afraid? I've been wondering if our skin is really indestructible. Are all injuries able to heal by themselves?" As Gu spoke, he suddenly became serious. "This old man's self-healing speed is not as fast as yours. Say, if this old man castrated you, would you still be able to recover?" When he said that, Bai Yanqing's body trembled violently as he broke out in cold sweat. However, Gu burst out laughing. "Tisk tsk tsk, this old man is simply a genius." Gu must have forgotten that the word castrated was said by a certain woman first. Bai Yanqing was simply suffering a heavy blow to his body and mind. He did not even care about Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi dual cultivating. He was terrified, not daring to imagine what kind of humiliation he would have to endure after Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi dual cultivated and Gu released him. He was finally afraid. Finally. He wanted to die. If Long Fei Yi cultivated the Lustbite power, then he would happily kill him with a single slash. The Lustbite power was the mysterious power that had massacred the Snow Wolf clan back then. This mysterious power was different from the Phoenix power that lurked in the human body. This power was a kind of secret technique that still needed to be cultivated. Not everyone could cultivate it. After this secret technique fell into the hands of the East Qin Imperial clan, no one in the East Qin Imperial clan had cultivated it. Long Fei Yi was the first. For the entire night, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were focused on cultivating. As for Bai Yanqing, he was filled with fear and a desire to die. This was his most tragic and most pitiful retribution. However, in just one night, Gu had already asked for 10 bags of rations and 2 jugs of water from Gu Beiyue. If they did not bring enough rations and water, they would have been eaten to death by Gu. It was not that Gu was greedy, but his body could not take it. During Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's dual cultivation period, even if he ate all the rations, he had to maintain his physical strength and raise enough bramble vines. Gu had never felt this kind of hunger before. He even felt that all the energy in his body was being sucked dry, and he even had a feeling of exhaustion. He had never consumed so many bramble vines in the past few days, so he had never experienced this kind of situation before. He also did not know what was going on with his body. He could only eat, and eat. Gu Beiyue was very clear how much Gu's heart ached for those rations and water. He guessed that there must be something wrong with Gu's body, otherwise he would not be so hungry. Gu Beiyue was also worried as he gave the rations. They had not found a way to open this barrier. What if they were trapped for a month or 2, or even longer? What would they do? He, Long Fei Yi, and Gu could all cultivate in seclusion to keep their bodies in a low-energy state. They could maintain this state for at least 3 months, or even longer. However, the pregnant princess could not cultivate in seclusion. Gu was also worried about this problem, but once he felt that the bramble vines were showing signs of exhaustion, he had to endure his guilt and continue eating rations. Gu Beiyue glanced at Long Fei Yi and the rest. He knew that they would need at least 2 more hours to finish. Without hesitation, he stretched his hand to Gu's mouth and said seriously, "Seventh young master, I'll have to trouble you. Of course Gu Qishao knew what Gu Beiyue meant. He knitted his brows and hesitated. The princess can't be hungry, and my little master can't be hungry either. It's okay, they will finish in about 2 more hours. Gu Beiyue smiled gently. It's okay, just a bite. Gu had no other choice. Seeing Gu Beiyue smile, he also smiled magnanimously. How can I waste such an opportunity? Gu Beiyue, you have to bear with the pain. Gu Beiyue smiled but did not say anything. Gu really bit down hard. If he did not bite down hard, how could he drink Gu Beiyue's blood? He did not know if this blood could help him, but it was not enough to make him hungry or powerless. At this moment, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were doing the last and most crucial part of their cultivation. They had no time to care about what was happening here. When Gu let go of Gu Beiyue's hand, a bloody wound appeared on Gu Beiyue's arm. It looked ghastly on his warm skin. When Gu Beiyue saw it, he knew that this wound would leave a scar. Gu hid all his pain and guilt in the bottom of his heart. He pretended to lick the blood from the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, I'll leave a scar for you. If I die, you can look at it and think of me. Gu Beiyue was slightly stunned, but he quickly smiled faintly and joked. You must live well. If my wife misunderstands, you have to help me explain. Gu laughed loudly. Gu Beiyue, other than Poison Girl, no one is worthy of you. You won't have a wife. I will. Gu Beiyue's calm tone made it hard to tell whether he was joking or serious. In any case, Gu did not believe it. Gu Beiyue was not wrong. His blood was enough to support Gu for a while. 2 hours later, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi put away their long swords at the same time. Hand in hand, they slowly landed on the ground. Gu Beiyue hurriedly brought the rations over. The whole night must have tired the princess out. Gu Qishao stood up and stretched before running over as well. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi then realized that Gu was carrying Bai Yanqing over from afar. They did not know whether to laugh or cry. Even the stern Long Fei Yi was smiling. Gu Beiyue was very fast. He had already reached Long Fei Yi's side, but Gu was still running. Princess, Your Highness, did everything go smoothly? Gu Beiyue asked seriously. Long Fei nodded. He gripped the sword and tightened his grip, causing an invisible wave of energy to emanate from it. Gu subconsciously retreated. He only felt that this force was vigorous, domineering, and powerful. This is the true lustbite power, the most powerful force. Long Fei Yi said seriously. His nirvana power had already been completely devoured by the lustbite power, forming the most powerful force. Gu Beiyue was overjoyed. Just as he was about to speak, Han Yunxi suddenly grabbed Long Fei Yi's hand and exclaimed, Little thing. Before Han Yunxi could finish her words, her vision turned black and she fainted. At the same time, Gu suddenly stopped. Bai Yanqing actually broke free from the thorny vines on his back. But Bai Yanqing seemed to be shaken to the ground by a force. A huge snow wolf appeared out of thin air. Little thing came out. But why was its eyes filled with hatred? It was glaring at Long Fei Yi. Chapter 1147. Lil Thing broke out of Bai Yanqing's poisoned storage space, and Han Yunxi fainted. These two events seemed to have happened at the same time. No one knew whether it was Lil Thing that helped Han Yunxi advance, or Han Yunxi's advancement that allowed Lil Thing to come out. While everyone was happy, they noticed that Lil Thing's bright and sharp wolf eyes were staring at Long Fei Yi with hatred. That gaze was like a wolf staring at its prey, ready to attack at any time. As Long Fei supported the unconscious Han Yunxi, he was the first to sense the hostility. He was both on guard and bewildered at the same time. What's wrong with this rat? It usually ran away when it saw him. Now that it had turned into a wolf, it actually dared to stare at him. Everyone was surprised. Gu Beiyue whispered, "Your Highness, it seems that the snow wolf has fully recovered and even advanced. It's very angry." What? It recognized Bai Yanqing as its master. Long Fei Yi whispered. "I'm not sure, but it's very hostile. Be careful." Gu Beiyue said. Although he couldn't communicate with Lil Thing's divine sense, they could be considered telepathic. In the past, he would know what Lil Thing meant with just one look. Lil Thing's current gaze was filled with hatred and killing intent. Compared to Bai Yanqing, the snow wolf was immortal and indestructible. Its fangs were highly poisonous, and once bitten, it would definitely die. Now that the princess was unconscious, no one knew when the princess would wake up. Gu had to guard against Bai Yanqing. If the snow wolf attacked fiercely, he and his highness wouldn't be able to withstand it. Gu also saw that the situation wasn't right. He wanted to go over, but when he saw Bai Yanqing, who was shocked to the side, he didn't move. He had to guard against Bai Yanqing. At this time, the snow wolf was already growling. It stared at Long Fei Yi as it stretched out its front paw and slowly bent its body forward. This action, it was about to pounce. Gu Beiyue shouted, "Little Thing, what's wrong with you?" Lil Thing glanced at Gu Beiyue, a trace of sadness flashing across its blood-red eyes. However, it quickly looked at Long Fei Yi. This was the man Mama Yunqi loved the most, the man it had feared for a long time. Today, it finally understood why it was so afraid of him. Almost every time he appeared, it would be afraid. So he was hiding the lustbite power in his body, so he was the one with the lustbite power. It was the person who had the power to destroy the snow wolves. Of course, it knew that he was not the one who had destroyed its people and its parents hundreds of years ago. But if he had the lustbite power, it must be related to that person back then, it must be. It was unable to calm down, especially in the snow wolf grave. It was even more unable to calm down. It smelled the smell of the snow wolf's bones. Although the snow wolves were poisonous creatures, they had never harmed the innocent. They lived freely in the forest and coexisted peacefully with the humans of the snow wolf clan. Why? Why did that person back then have to kill its people so cruelly? Why did he kill its parents? It remembered everything now, including those bloody scenes. His mother and father fell, still looking at him with their eyes wide open. He was scared out of his wits and desperately ran into the crater. He hid in the crater and shivered. He kept whining and crying. He didn't know what to do. Fragments of memories floated into Lil Thing's mind again. Hatred churned in its heart, slowly burning away its reason. It couldn't see its favorite Mama Yunqi, nor its most beloved gentleman. All it saw was Long Fei Yi, the Long Fei Yi who held the lustbite power. He was an enemy. It wanted revenge. Whoa! Lil Thing suddenly gave a roar and prepared to pounce over. At this moment, Gu Beiyue stood in front of Long Fei Yi with open arms. "Lil Thing, come here. The gentleman missed you." At these words, Lil Thing couldn't help but look towards the gentleman again. It could understand, the gentleman said he missed it. The gentleman's embrace was what it missed most. Right now, it wanted nothing more than to throw itself into the gentleman's arms and bawl its eyes out. But it couldn't. It had to get revenge. Gu Beiyue wasn't confident that he could stop Lil Thing, but he had to at least figure out why Lil Thing hated Long Fei Yi so much. Loudly, he asked, "What are you doing? If you dare to hurt His Highness, the princess, and I will never forgive you." It was the lustbite energy that had aroused Lil Thing's hatred, allowing it to unleash its greatest strength to break free of Bai Yanqing's poison storage space. Lil Thing's advancement meant that Han Yunxi had advanced as well. Lil Thing could now communicate with Mama Yunxi through its consciousness and understand human speech. The gentleman's words made it pause. Never forgive. The gentleman doesn't know anything. He doesn't know that it was the Lustbite energy that destroyed its home and the Snow Wolf clan's worship, forcing them to form a marriage alliance with the poison sect. He doesn't know that Mama Yunxi's bloodline is the purest of the Snow Wolf clan. He doesn't know that the Lustbite energy destroyed Mama Yunxi's clan as well. Lil Thing couldn't control itself. Its killing intent had already drowned out all of its reason as its bloodthirsty nature surfaced. Finally, Lil Thing ignored the gentleman's warnings and pounced forward. Gu Beiyue, you protect Yunxi. Long Fei Yi was about to hand Han Yunxi over to Gu Beiyue before drawing his sword to face Lil Thing when Gu Beiyue pushed him aside and turned to face the charging Lil Thing with open arms. Lil Thing was an undying beast. If His Highness fought with it, both sides would suffer. The best way was to drag things out until the princess woke up. She could communicate with Lil Thing through her consciousness, so she could at least know what was wrong with it. Lil Thing was very fast as it bared its claws. It didn't expect the gentleman to do this, but couldn't stop even if it wanted to. "Awoo!" It roared. In the blink of an eye, it was on top of the gentleman. Fortunately, it retracted its claws in time to push the gentleman to the ground and step on him without hurting him. Lil Thing immediately fled and attacked Long Fei Yi at lightning speed. Long Fei Yi had long been on guard and retreated while protecting Han Yunxi, his sword drawn. Gu Beiyue flew over. He couldn't bear to hurt Lil Thing, nor was he sure he could. Once again, he stood in front of Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi. This time, his gaze on Lil Thing was no longer gentle, but stern and severe. He didn't say a word. Lil Thing was stunned, but very quickly, it pounced on the gentleman from the other side. Gu Beiyue chased after it. No matter how fast Lil Thing was, it couldn't be faster than its gentleman. Just like that, one man and one beast chased after each other. Bai Yanqing didn't make any movements as he watched from afar with a cold smile. He was seriously injured and couldn't escape from Gu's thorny vines. Even if he died, he wanted this poisonous beast to accompany him in death. Long Fei Ye's lustbite power could kill him, but it could also kill the poisonous beast. He sat on the ground as if he was watching a show, watching Gu Beiyue and Lil Thing's chase, watching Long Fei Yi carrying Han Yunxi and following Gu Beiyue to dodge. After dual cultivation succeeded, Long Fei Ye's nirvana power had disappeared. Now he only had one type of inner strength, and that was the lustbite power. Thus, as long as Long Fei Yi made a move against Lil Thing, he would be able to kill it with a single slash. He was looking forward to it. He was looking forward to Han Yunxi's pet, the last Snow Wolf of the Snow Wolf clan, dying at Long Fei Ye's hands. He was sure that Han Yunxi would cry. Long Fei Yi would forever owe the poison sect a debt of blood. Gu grew anxious as he watched. He wanted nothing more than to pounce on Lil Thing and give it a good lesson. He didn't show up when he was supposed to help, but when they finally caught Bai Yanqing, this little beast actually came out to make trouble. How abominable! Whenever Lil Thing pounced, Gu Beiyue would appear in front of it. After a few rounds, Gu Beiyue knew where Lil Thing was going to attack from and stopped it in advance. How could Lil Thing's brain be a match for the gentleman's? After a few rounds, Lil Thing was completely blinded by hatred. It grew more and more furious, even forgetting who the white-robed gentleman was. "Awoo! Awoo!" Lil Thing let out a long cry. Its attacks grew fiercer and fiercer. Suddenly, Lil Thing slammed down with its paw, splitting the grass apart. Long Fei Yi shielded Han Yunxi and leapt into the air. Gu Beiyue leapt up as well. Lil Thing took advantage of this opportunity to dash under Gu Beiyue's feet and pounce on Long Fei Yi. Long Fei Yi had already been patient enough to let Gu Beiyue protect him for so long. Now that Lil Thing was attacking him, he had no reason to not attack. Of course, he didn't know that his lustbite power could easily destroy Lil Thing's undying body and kill it. His eyes were cold as he decided to teach Lil Thing a lesson. But just as his sword was about to pounce on Lil Thing, Gu Beiyue still managed to rush over. Gu Beiyue pushed away Long Fei Ye's hand, and at this moment, Lil Thing's sharp claws pounced over fiercely. The sharp claws fiercely swept across Gu Beiyue's chest. This time, everyone was stunned. They saw 4 long claw marks appeared on Gu Beiyue's chest, and fresh blood quickly appeared, drenching his white robes. Moreover, after the fresh blood appeared, it immediately turned black. This was poison. Although Lil Thing's sharp claws poison wasn't as incurable as the poison Fang blood, but it was still highly toxic. Long Fei Yi shielded Han Yunxi as they landed and berated loudly, "Gu Beiyue, why are you so stupid? You're seeking death." Although he couldn't kill Lil Thing, he could still stop Lil Thing. Gu Beiyue still had a solemn expression as he looked at Lil Thing, his brows slowly creasing. With his speed, he could still evade that earlier situation. But he had already decided to take a gamble. Lil Thing was stunned. It looked at young master's tightly creased brows and then looked at the gradually turning black bloodstains on young master's chest. It instantly sobered up and subconsciously retreated. What did it do? It had just injured young master. Suddenly, Gu Beiyue seemed to have lost all his strength as he knelt down. He subconsciously clutched his chest and his hands were immediately stained with blood. But he continued to stare at Lil Thing. "Gu, what are you waiting for? Cure the poison." Long Fei Yi shouted. Who knew that Gu's reply was so despairing? "I can't cure it." Chapter 1148. With Gu's reply, Bai Yanqing burst into laughter. "Just wait for your death. Old man won't help him detoxify the poison." In reality, Bai Yanqing could detoxify the poison, but he couldn't concoct the antidote in this situation. His poison storage space had already been emptied by Lil Thing. "Shut up." Gu viciously flung the thorny vines at Bai Yanqing's face. Only then did Bai Yanqing shut his mouth. He was waiting for a good show. The blood on Gu Beiyue's chest had all turned black. His situation was very critical, and Long Fei Yi had no time to worry about Bai Yanqing. Long Fei Yi saw Han Yunxi put down on the ground and said coldly, "The poison beast's blood can detoxify hundreds of poisons." Gu finally remembered this and was overjoyed. As long as he took Lil Thing's blood, he could detoxify Bai Yanqing's poison, and it would also greatly damage Lil Thing's vitality. Thinking back, it was precisely because Poison Girl didn't understand the situation that she took Lil Thing's blood to save Long Tianma that Lil Thing only recovered today. As long as he took Lil Thing's blood to detoxify the poison, Lil Thing's poison fangs would be crippled, and it would take a long time to recover. "Long Fei Yi, do it!" Gu shouted. "Your Highness, don't." Gu Beiyue stopped him. If he wanted Long Fei Yi to take Lil Thing's blood, he wouldn't have been poisoned just now. He was betting on whether Lil Thing would take the initiative to save him. He hoped that he could use this opportunity to wake up that ridiculous and kind Lil Thing from before. "Your Highness, Lil Thing will save me." Gu Beiyue looked at Lil Thing. His words were not just for Long Fei Yi, but also for Lil Thing. At this moment, Lil Thing was also looking at its young master, its scarlet eyes were already glistening with tears. He was the young master it loved the most. The thing it hated the most was someone dirtying the young master's clothes. The thing it loved the most was to lie in the young master's arms, smell the clean scent on the young master's body, and bask in the warm sunlight with the young master. The young master's white robe was dirted by it. Young master was about to be poisoned to death. No, it couldn't imagine how lonely it would be in this world without a young master. The flames of anger in Lil Thing's eyes were gradually extinguished. Just as Lil Thing was about to go over and save them, Lil Thing suddenly stopped. Bai Yanqing suddenly shouted, "Little Thing! Have you forgotten how the lustbite power destroyed your clansmen? Have you forgotten the blood that flowed like a river in the heavenly pit? Have you forgotten what's buried under this land? Ha, you actually want to save your enemy on this land?" Bai Yanqing's words shocked everyone. Was it the lustbite power that killed the snow wolves? Long Fei Yi was surprised. "Little Thing, can you smell the smell of those skeletons underground? Do you still remember how your parents died?" Bai Yanqing shouted, "Little Thing, your master lied to you. Your master already knew that he had the lustbite power, but you were kept in the dark until now, ha ha ha. You are just a pet in their eyes, no different from a cat or a dog. Sowing discord. Sowing discord again. Bai Yanqing, this father will never let you open your mouth again." Gu directly tied Bai Yanqing's mouth with vines in his rage, making it impossible for Bai Yanqing to close his mouth or open his mouth. Naturally, he couldn't speak anymore. But Bai Yanqing's words were already enough. He couldn't wait for Long Fei Yi to use the lustbite power to kill him right now. Once and for all, he wouldn't have to suffer so much pain and humiliation anymore. The word castrated had always lingered in his mind. In the past, it was the lustbite power that exterminated the snow wolves, so... "You hate me this much?" Long Fei Yi asked. The little thing immediately roared at him. So fierce, so fierce. The lustbite power did not belong to the East Qin royal family, but rather it was a secret internal cultivation technique passed down in Jianghu. It was obtained by the East Qin royal family. Exterminating the snow wolves in the past had nothing to do with his East Qin royal family. This black pot, Long Fei Yi would not take it. He was about to explain, but who would have thought that the angry little thing would not attack him? Rather, it charged at Gu Beiyue without any hesitation. It was not provoked by Bai Yanqing, it still chose to save its young master. The little thing charged to Gu Beiyue's side and immediately turned into a little Gu rat. It was only the size of a palm and was as furry as a ball. There was a world of difference between this and the tall and mighty snow wolf from before. It was too familiar with its young master. It immediately dug into its young master's sleeve and pulled out a small golden knife. It placed it in its young master's hand and moved its back over. Even if it could not die, it was still afraid of pain. With such a small body, even the slightest injury would cause it unbearable pain. Even though it couldn't see the knife with its back, it still closed its eyes and waited anxiously for the pain to come. Gu could not believe the sight. He began to wonder if the little beast had taken a fancy to Gu Beiyue. If the handsome, and devastatingly beautiful him could kill both men and women, then wouldn't Gu Beiyue kill both men and beasts? Long Fei Yi knitted his brows at the sight, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He was about to help Han Yunxi up from the ground when Han Yunxi opened her eyes. Yunxi. He quickly ran over. He rarely called her that, but it didn't feel awkward at all. Instead, it felt natural as if he'd gotten used to it. Han Yunxi might have been unconscious, but she could still hear everything outside. Her head was still a little dizzy when she opened her eyes, but she immediately sobered up after sitting up. She pushed Long Fei Yi aside and shot out a hidden needle, knocking the little golden knife out of Gu Beiyue's hand. Lil Thing's poison fang blood can't be destroyed. I still have to destroy Bai Yanqing's undying body. Long Fei Yi wanted to help her up, but failed. Han Yunxi stood up and strode over to Gu Beiyue. She said sternly, "Lil Thing, the lustbite energy doesn't belong to the East Qin Imperial clan. Behave yourself, or else I'll pull out your teeth as soon as I cure Gu Beiyue of his poison." Lil Thing looked up in surprise, but quickly communicated with Mama Yunxi through its consciousness. If the lustbite energy doesn't belong to the East Qin Imperial clan, how could Long Fei Yi have it? You don't believe me? Han Yunxi cold retorted. Lil Thing didn't speak, but Han Yunxi picked it up and tossed it onto Long Fei Yi's body. If you don't believe me, then bite him to death. Long Fei Yi caught Lil Thing and held it in his arms. He looked down at the same time Lil Thing looked up. Besides Han Yunxi, his hands had never held a living thing before. He didn't seem to be used to it, but when he saw the little thing's deep eyes staring at him, he immediately came back to his senses and coldly said, "The lustbite power was obtained by the East Qin Imperial family. The one who destroyed your snow wolf pack back then was definitely not this prince's ancestor. Otherwise, this crown prince wouldn't have kept you alive until now." Hearing Long Fei Yi's last words, Lil Thing couldn't find a reason to retort. After careful thought, it made sense. As soon as it realized it had misunderstood Papa Long, Lil Thing looked into his cold eyes and grew afraid. Its white fur stood on end. It was about to flee when Papa Long hugged it and leaned into his arms. That was all it took for him to grab it by the tail and toss it aside. The entire process happened so fast that Lil Thing didn't even realize what had happened until it landed heavily on the ground. It didn't dare to look at Papa Long again, but quickly ran to stand guard by the gentleman's side. Currently, Mama Yunxi was treating the princess's poison. Afraid that Papa Long would do something to it, it quickly transformed into a tall snow wolf to make itself seem more difficult to bully as it crouched by the gentleman's side. It was only a misunderstanding, so Long Fei Yi didn't make things difficult for Lil Thing. He simply stood on the side and watched Han Yunxi deftly treat Gu Beiyue's poison with needles. Han Yunxi tore open Gu Beiyue's clothes and inserted needles into his chest. Gu Beiyue's sickly body was actually quite impressive. His firm chest and defined muscles were enough to make one's imagination roam. Of course, Han Yunxi didn't have time to think so much. Her movements were extremely fast, afraid that she wouldn't be able to protect Gu Beiyue and waste Lil Thing's blood. Long Fei stood on one side, looking at the pregnant Han Yunxi, then at the tall Lil Thing. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He'd returned the hug he owed Lil Thing just then. Now that he thought about it, he'd owed it a long time ago. Han Yunxi was already pregnant, and Lil Thing had recovered. With Han Yunxi personally handling things, there was no poison that couldn't be cured. Han Yunxi put away the last needle and exhaled. "Dr. Gu, I wasn't strict enough with my discipline and let this little beast hurt you. How about I give it to you as an apology?" As soon as she said this, Lil Thing, who had its head buried in the ground, looked up at the two of them. Gu Beiyue's smile was a little pale, but still warm. "Take the poison beast's blood and I'll accept it." Lil Thing's eyes lit up immediately, and it opened its mouth wide, as if it wanted Han Yunxi to pull out its teeth. Han Yunxi wouldn't really pull out Lil Thing's teeth. She looked at Lil Thing, and not long after, 2 clusters of black blood flew out of Lil Thing's mouth. At this moment, everyone realized that Han Yunxi had successfully advanced to the 3rd level of the poison storage space. She could collect any kind of poison as she pleased. "Ha, poison lass, can you suck this old thing into your poison storage space too?" Gu Qishao laughed out loud. Bai Yanqing was a poison goo human, so he was considered a poison beast, right? Previously, Poison Girl's poison storage space was lower than Bai Yanqing's, so she couldn't do anything to him. Now that Poison Girl had successfully advanced, what was there to be afraid of about Bai Yanqing? Han Yunshi said coldly, there are plenty of ways to kill him, this princess won't disgust herself. At this moment, Bai Yanqing was kneeling on the grass, looking at Han Yunshi in horror. Han Yunshi took out the perplexing butterfly illusion and the 8 poisonous teardrops, and dripped the perplexing butterfly illusion into the poison beast's blood in front of Bai Yanqing. Soon, the 9th poisonous teardrop appeared. Gu Beiyue supported Lil Thing on its back and stood up. The 4 of them looked at each other and smiled, all very happy. These 9 poisonous teardrops weren't easy to come by. However, just as Han Yunshi was about to mix the 9 poisonous teardrops together to obtain the antidote for the poison Gu human, the 9 poisonous teardrops suddenly flew out of the special porcelain bottle and floated in the air. What was going on? Long Fei Yi seemed to have sensed something, and immediately grabbed Han Yunshi's hand, shielding her behind him. He said coldly, "Who's there? Come out." Chapter 1149. As soon as Long Fei Yi sensed something amiss, Han Yunshi activated her poison storage space to retrieve the 9 poisonous teardrops. But to her surprise, she couldn't do so. The 9 poisonous teardrops seemed to be controlled by an unknown power, resisting her. What's going on? Is it Bai Yanqing? Han Yunshi looked at Bai Yanqing, only to see that Bai Yanqing was also scanning their surroundings. He looked just as surprised as they were. If it wasn't Bai Yanqing, then who could it be? Was there another poison sect orphan? Gu Beiyue and Gu Qishao grew wary as well. Bai Yanqing was indeed surprised. When Han Yunshi had taken out the perplexing butterfly illusion, he'd secretly tried to use his poison storage space to retrieve it. But he'd failed. There were differences between ranks in the poison storage space, and it was clear that Han Yunshi, who'd just broken through to the 3rd rank, was much stronger than him. If it wasn't him, who else could it be? Take them back. Long Fei Yi whispered. He carried Han Yunshi into the air, ready to snatch the 9 poisonous teardrops. But at that moment, the 9 poisonous teardrops suddenly scattered in all directions. At the same time, a group of black-robed men appeared out of thin air. This, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunshi were alarmed. Long Fei Yi landed with Han Yunshi in his arms, and Gu Beiyue immediately rushed over. Are these people real or fake? Gu Beiyue whispered. They were in a barrier, and they weren't familiar with it. It was hard to tell the difference between real and fake in a barrier. Who are you people? Han Yunshi demanded. The black-robed men surrounded them, but didn't answer. Unexpectedly, the little thing suddenly flew onto Gu Beiyue's shoulder and jumped around excitedly. It even gestured at Han Yunshi and chirped non-stop. After Lil Thing's poison beast blood was taken away, all of its cultivation had been ruined. It had already turned back into a little squirrel and couldn't communicate with Mama Yunshi's consciousness. Han Yunshi didn't understand what Lil Thing was talking about, but she was sure that it was someone that Lil Thing knew. Could it be that there really was a poison sect orphan guarding the Snow Wolf grave? Could the poison sect orphan who had saved her mother all those years ago be the guardian of the Snow Wolf's grave? Are you the poison sect's gravekeepers? I'm also a descendant of the poison sect. We have no ill intentions, Han Yunshi said. Perhaps this group of people would know how to leave this barrier. Helpless, not only did the black-clothed man not answer her, he lowered his head instead. What did that mean? Squeak squeak. Squeak. Suddenly, the little thing squeaked, and it was unknown whether it was from excitement or fear. All it did was hug a tuft of Gu Beiyue's hair as it screeched non-stop. The main character is here. Long Fei Yi suddenly took to the skies and unsheathed his sword. Very soon, a middle-aged man dressed in white flew towards them from afar. At first glance, he was clearly on the other side of the snowy mountains, but upon closer inspection, he was right in front of them. He held 9 poison teardrops in one hand while the other rested behind his back. He floated in the air like a god looking down on the crowd. Although he was middle-aged, there were no wrinkles on his face. Only his arms were a little gray. Still, this didn't affect his handsome looks. His features seemed to have been carved by the heavens themselves, and were indescribably handsome. His cold, black eyes exuded an aura that didn't belong to the mundane world, but kept everyone at 1,000 li away. It was a coldness that didn't allow the world to profane or covet him. He was like the god of this world, the solemn and dignified aura emanating from his body. No one dared to provoke him. Everyone was stunned by the sight. Even Long Fei couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence. However, Long Fei didn't shrink back. He raised his sword and pointed it at the man, his voice as cold as ice. "Who are you?" The white-robed man's eyes didn't waver at all. He slowly raised the hand behind his back. His movements were extremely slow, like Tai Chi, but the needles that flew out of his sleeves were extremely fast. They were even faster than Han Yunqi's own needles. Long Fei didn't dodge, but swung his sword to hit the needles. A single slash was enough to knock them all out of the way. When the needles fell to the ground, Gu Beiyue looked at them and was shocked. It's profound gold. Profound gold was the rarest material in this world. Aside from the poison sect, very few places had it. Even the poison sect only had 2 or 3 locations. This man's needles were actually made of profound gold. The white-robed man seemed surprised that Long Fei had knocked the needles out of the way, but he didn't show it on his face. All he did was give Long Fei a deep look. His well-defined fingers suddenly clenched into a fist. In an instant, countless needles flew out, 3 to 4 times the number from before. All of them were aimed at Long Fei. "There's poison, be careful," Han Yunqi shouted. Long Fei had no choice but to dodge while swinging his sword. Han Yunqi knitted her brows. She wanted to use her poison storage space to take away the needles, but she couldn't do it. Long Fei was still swinging his needles when the white-robed man unleashed another wave. Han Yunqi grew even more anxious. The detoxification system told her that the poison in these needles was extremely terrifying. Even if she could detect it, she couldn't cure it. If Long Fei wasn't careful, he'd die without a doubt. "Who are you? What are you trying to do?" Han Yunqi roared. The white-robed man ignored her. Han Yunqi thought, could it be that this guy's poison storage space was of a higher level than hers? So, she couldn't take away his poison. She didn't believe that this would work. She flew up into the air. She wanted to see if the poison storage space would be able to keep the needles if they were to attack her. Previously, Bai Yanqing's level was higher than hers. When Bai Yanqing used poison on her, didn't she still manage to take it away? Using a level 2 to deal with a level 3 was an excellent method. Han Yunqi flew over and hugged Long Fei. Sure enough, all the needles flying towards Long Fei disappeared into thin air, absorbed by Han Yunqi's poison storage space. Han Yunqi was overjoyed, I guessed right. The white-robed man suddenly stopped and looked at Han Yunqi seriously. After a while, he said 2 words, smart. "Who are you? We have no enmity between us. Why are you trying to kill me?" Han Yunqi asked anxiously. The white-robed man didn't answer her. He casually waved his hand. His action seemed casual, but the force behind it was surprising. Han Yunqi was actually sent flying. "You're courting death," Long Fei coldly said. He was about to chase after Han Yunqi when he was blocked by an invisible wall. He reached out and pressed against the wall. He couldn't push it away. A barrier. It's a barrier technique. Gu Beiyue exclaimed. He had already caught Han Yunxi. Who are you? Han Yunxi shouted. However, the white-robed man ignored them. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue tried to approach Long Feiyi. Who knew that Long Feiyi was actually trapped in an invisible barrier by the white-robed man? They couldn't get close at all. Han Yunxi pulled out Immerse's sword and used her phoenix power. However, no matter how many times she slashed with her sword, the invisible barrier didn't budge at all. Princess, don't disturb the baby. Gu Beiyue anxiously stopped her. Long Feiyi also looked over and shook his head at Han Yunxi. Lil Thing looked at the white-robed man and became even more excited. It jumped onto Gu Beiyue's shoulder and waved at Han Yunxi with all its might. At this time, Han Yunxi finally noticed something about Lil Thing. You know him? Han Yunxi asked. Lil Thing immediately nodded and chattered away. To Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue, it was all just a squeak. Lil Thing wanted to tell Mama Yunxi that this white-robed middle-aged man had to be her father. He had to be. This was the man with pure snow wolf blood that it had met in the mountains of the poison sect. It wanted to submit to him, but he refused and disappeared into the woods. It was nowhere to be found in the mountains and plains. Although he wasn't young anymore, his looks hadn't changed much. His bloodline wouldn't change either. It had to be him, it couldn't be wrong. Lil Thing remembered everything and understood why it liked Mama Yunxi so much. Because Mama Yunxi had pure snow wolf blood in her too. That old thing by Yanqing wasn't Mama Yunxi's father, but this man was. Princess, this person has to be more capable than you and His Highness. Let's see what he's planning, Gu Beiyue murmured. Han Yunxi had no choice but to wait and see. She shouted at Long Feiyi, you have to be careful. I can't cure the poison in those needles either. I know, Long Feiyi's gaze never left the white-robed man as he stood on guard. As expected, the white-robed man shot out more needles. This time, the needles blotted out the sky and covered the earth, making it impossible to defend against them. Long Fei stopped swinging his sword, but raised it high above his head. In a flash, the lustbite energy erupted from the blade to form a massive ring of energy that exploded outwards in an intimidating manner. In a flash, all of the needles were knocked aside. Some of them scattered in all directions while the rest shot towards the white-robed man. The white-robed man remained standing in the air, unperturbed. Even when the needles were right in front of him, he didn't move a muscle. As soon as the needles touched his body, they vanished without a trace, returning to his poison storage space. Seeing this, Han Yunxi and the rest exhaled in relief. But the white-robed man suddenly flew towards Long Feiyi and began to fight barehanded with Long Feiyi. Their fists collided with each other, but it wasn't clear who had knocked the other aside. In any case, Long Feiyi was sent flying while the white-robed man retreated a few steps. Long Feiyi's lips rose to a cold smile. You're a gentleman. If the white-robed man had poisoned him at such close range, he would have lost his life long ago. But the white-robed man didn't. He really was fighting barehanded. He liked this kind of contest. The white-robed man still didn't say anything. His expression was so cold that no one could guess what he was thinking. Long Fei had finally met someone who cherished his words like gold and didn't show his emotions on his face. Regardless of whether he was friend or foe, he still admired this kind of person. Long Feiyi placed the Ganjiang sword on his back. Seeing this, the white-robed man immediately attacked. Long Feiyi decisively accepted the challenge. Both of their fists were very hard and very fast. One attacked, one blocked, one fought. Very soon, they had exchanged a few rounds. Surprisingly, they were evenly matched. Chapter 1150. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue didn't even dare to blink. They never expected Long Fei Ye's martial arts to be so good. Nearby, Gu and Bai Yanqing were also dumbfounded. Gu muttered to himself, "Long Fei Yi, you seem to have met your match." Bai Yanqing was filled with suspicion. He finally remembered the person who had saved Mu Axayan all those years ago. He was certain that he had killed that person. That person was an orphan of the poison sect. Could he be related to this group of people? Long Fei Yi and the white-robed man's movements were so fast that even Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue couldn't see them clearly. The two of them fought as they soared into the air, gradually using both hands and feet. Their movements were like the wind and shadows. Even their bodies couldn't be seen clearly. All they could see was two shadows mixed together as they fought. "Princess, if it's a bare-handed fight, His Highness will definitely be evenly matched with this person. His Highness won't be at a disadvantage," Gu Beiyue whispered. "Even if he won't be at a disadvantage, he can't just waste time like this." Han Yunxi was still a little anxious. She didn't know who this white-robed man was or where he came from, so she couldn't stop worrying. After all, if this white-robed man was unhappy, he could use poison on Long Fei Yi in a matter of minutes. She wouldn't allow Long Fei Yi to be in any danger. As she watched, she racked her brains for a way to stop them. She had to figure out who this white-robed man was and whether he was a friend or foe. But Han Yunxi couldn't think of a good idea no matter how hard she racked her brains. At this moment, Long Fei was struck in the stomach by a fist, sending him plummeting from the skies. "Long Fei Yi!" Han Yunxi cried out. She ran over without a care for anything else, completely forgetting about the barrier. But when she reached Long Fei Ye's side, she wasn't stopped by the barrier at all. The barrier disappeared. Gu Beiyue caught up with him and saw that Long Fei Yi was bleeding from the corner of his mouth. His face did not look good. Han Yunxi was still worried. She activated the in-depth detection function of the detoxification system. After checking and confirming that Long Fei Yi was not poisoned, she breathed a sigh of relief. "It's just an internal injury. It's not a big deal," Long Fei Yi said lightly. He did not let Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue help him and stood up by himself. He bowed to the white-robed man. "This one has lost." Perhaps the people watching did not see any clues, but Long Fei Yi knew very well that this man in white was very strong. Whether it was his inner strength or martial arts, they were all at a level that exceeded his expectations. He never expected such an expert to exist in Cloud Realm continent. The white-robed man slowly straightened out his robes and ignored Long Fei Yi. Instead, he looked towards Han Yunxi and called, "What's your name?" Han Yunxi's face was full of displeasure. Her heart ached for Long Fei Yi. Although Long Fei Yi said it was nothing serious, he was still spitting up blood. How could that be considered nothing serious? She looked at the white-robed man from head to toe before asking irritably, "Who are you? What's your name? It's not like we barged in on purpose. Moreover, as a descendant of the poison sect, I have the right to be here. What right do you have to hit me? My skills are inferior, so I deserve to be hit," the white-robed man cold replied. "You!" Han Yunxi lost her temper. "Do you mean that everyone in the world who's inferior to you deserves to be hit? If my son-in-law's skills are inferior, then he deserves to be hit," Han Qin cold said. Han Yunxi and the rest were all stunned. Son-in-law? Could it be, didn't my father die? Han Yunxi looked at Bai Yanqing in shock. Did Bai Yanqing lie to them? Bai Yanqing's mouth was bound by the vines, so he couldn't answer. He shook his head furiously, wondering what was going on as well. Han Chen waved his hand and the entire barrier shattered. The grass, blue sky, and white clouds all vanished, to be replaced by an enormous underground palace. Luminous pearls were embedded in the walls, illuminating the entire place as bright as day. The white-robed man had vanished without a trace. Abruptly, Lil Thing shrieked and darted forward. Han Yunxi and the rest hurried to catch up with Gu, dragging Bai Yanqing behind them. After passing through a few corridors, they entered a towering hall. This hall was actually a sacrificial hall, an extremely luxurious one. The walls were made of luminous pearls and gemstones of various colors, and even the floor was embedded with gemstones. At the very center of the hall was a tall platform, on which stood many tall skeletons. They were none other than the skeletons of snow wolves. Lil Thing had already jumped onto the skeletons and hugged them, sobbing. This was the real grave of the snow wolves. Even though the snow wolves had been reduced to skeletons, the skeletons standing tall on the sacrificial platform were still awe-inspiring. Not only were they in awe of the snow wolves, but they were also in awe of the mysterious power of nature. At this moment, Han Chen was standing on the sacrificial platform, under the tall skeletons of the snow wolves. His white robes were not as spotless as Gu Beiyue's. Instead, they were golden-collared and golden-sleeved. Golden totems were embroidered under the hem of his robes, making him look mysterious and noble. No matter where he stood, he would always be high and mighty, as cold as a god, looking down on all living things. He looked down at Han Yunxi and said coldly, "This sovereign is a priest of the Snow Wolf clan. The one who saved your mother back then was one of my subordinates. It was just a coincidence. Since you are this sovereign's daughter, the blood of the Blood Wolf clan flows in your veins. You have nothing to do with the poison sect. Wait for me at the sacrificial altar in 10 years. I will teach you boundary techniques. Once you've learned them, you can stay here to guard the grave and cultivate." Everyone was stunned by his words. Was he really Han Yunxi's father? But why did Bai Yanqing say that Han Yunxi's father had been killed? Back then, what had happened back then? Bai Yanqing's reaction was the most intense. He struggled, wanting Gu to remove the vines from his mouth. Seeing that he had something to say, Gu hesitated for a moment, but still did it. As soon as the vines were removed, Bai Yanqing roared at Han Chen, "Who are you? You're lying. The priests of the Snow Wolf clan have always been women. When the priests of the Snow Wolf clan married into the poison sect, the Snow Wolf clan ceased to exist long ago. There's only the poison sect left in this world, only the poison sect." Han Chen finally turned to Bai Yanqing. Neither angry nor amused, his voice was calm as he asked, "You're a direct descendant of the poison sect?" "Exactly. Old man will always have a third-tier poison storage space," Bai Yanqing declared loudly. Han Chen suddenly laughed softly. His arrogance and disdain were enough to make anyone feel inferior. Bai Yanqing looked up at him, his self-righteous heart a little fearful. The Snow Wolf clan is divided into light priests and dark priests. The light priests worship the snow wolves, while the dark priests worship the heavens and earth. The light priests are in charge of all affairs of the Blood Wolf clan, while we dark priests don't interfere with worldly affairs. When the Snow Wolf clan was destroyed, we dark priests traveled to the mysterious continent to search for the origin of the lustbite energy. After generations of hard work, we finally gained a foothold on the mysterious continent and established the Wolf sect. The light priests were useless, so they were forced to marry into the poison sect and drag out an ignoble existence. Han Chen looked at Bai Yanqing, the contempt on his lips deepening. His figure blurred as he appeared in front of Bai Yanqing. He bent down and grabbed Bai Yanqing's collar, saying coldly, "Your bloodline is already tainted. You don't have the right to yell at me. If you don't shut up, I can kill you without using the lustbite energy." At this moment, his grip on Bai Yanqing's collar began to exude an invisible force that left Bai Yanqing gaping in awe. He could sense that this force was threatening his life. Behind him, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were equally shocked. This man's strength must be above the lustbite energy. That's how he could kill Bai Yanqing. Gu muttered, the mysterious continent is located north of the Winter Crow clan's IC. It's a world where martial prowess reigns supreme. Han Yunxi had never heard of that continent, but Long Fei Yi knew of it. He had once suspected that the lustbite energy came from there, but now it looked like his guess was right. The lustbite energy was considered a top-tier power in Cloud Realm continent, but here on the mysterious continent, it was probably only mid-tier. Since Han Chen called himself this lord, he must have an extremely high status in the wolf sect of the mysterious continent. Bai Yanqing was so shocked that his heart trembled. Still, he couldn't help but ask, just what's your relationship with Muaxian? Could it be that Muaxian had long betrayed him and had an affair with this man? Was that why she used national enmity as an excuse to reject him? Bai Yanqing couldn't accept the truth. Back when he was with Muaxian, he'd cheated on her. But Muaxian said herself that she'd already forgiven him. Could it be that Muaxian had lied to him? Would she betray him like this? The more Bai Yanqing thought about it, the more vexed he felt. Just what's going on, he roared. When did you and Muaxian meet? Tell me. Earlier than you, Han Chen replied expressionlessly. Stunned, Bai Yanqing was about to speak when Han Chen grabbed him by the collar and tossed him aside. Bai Yanqing slammed into the wall and fell unconscious to the ground. It looked like a casual toss, but Long Fei Yi and the rest knew that Han Chen had used a lot of strength. So noisy. Take him away, Han Chen said coldly. The black-robed men immediately appeared and dragged Bai Yanqing out. Bai Yanqing was probably beside himself with rage, but Han Yunxi was very clear-headed. You're lying. You said you saved my mother by chance, but now you're saying you've known her for a long time. Which one is the truth? If they'd known each other for a long time, why didn't this man save Muaxian all those years ago? Why didn't he look for her after all these years? Han Chen ignored Han Yunxi and headed for a nearby tea table. Han Yunxi was both puzzled and angry. She was the first to chase after him and ask, just what's going on? If you're my father, why did I let my mother marry into Tianning's Han family? Why didn't you care about me for all these years? Are you still a man? You have the nerve to call yourself my father. You felt very comfortable watching us get bullied by Bai Yanqing from the shadows, didn't you? Han Chen stared at the girl in front of him for a long time before he finally spoke. You're nothing like me, much less your mother. You make it sound like you know my mother very well. Han Yunxi sounded sarcastic, but she was probing him. However, Han Chen didn't care about what she said. He continued to talk about his own business. Girl, you've passed the Wolf Clan's test. You can go now. Come find me again in 10 years. Han Yunxi was only testing him, but his words angered her. Coldly, she said, if you don't tell me what's going on, I'll go to the mysterious continent as soon as I get out. I'm sure the Wolf Clan will know the truth. Han Chen's eyes turned cold. Lass, are you threatening me? No, I'm warning you. Han Yunxi said coldly, you're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.